They say death is the end. They're wrong. I died with a blade in my heart and poison in my veins, killed by the man I called brother, the alpha I swore to serve. He smiled while I bled out under that full moon, left me rotting like trash in the dirt. But I didn't stay dead. I woke up in the enemy's palace, in a body that wasn't mine, soft, fragile, Omega. And now? Now I'm going to destroy everyone who thought I was gone. Welcome to my story. This is about betrayal, rebirth, and the kind of revenge that reshapes kingdoms. If you're here for it, stick around until the end. You won't believe where this goes. Drop a like, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, and let's begin. The frontier didn't forgive weakness. Kaelan. Vire learned that before he could walk, before he could speak, before he understood what mercy was supposed to mean. The Red Basin territory was a wasteland of rock, dust, and violence, a place where packs fought over scraps of land and water like starving dogs tearing at the same bone. Out here, you were either predator or prey. There was no middle ground, no safe harbor, no second chances for those who stumbled or showed their throat. Kaelan was born predator. His father died when he was 8, killed in a border skirmish over a dried-up creek bed that nobody even remembered the name of anymore. His mother lasted another 2 years before grief hollowed her out from the inside and left nothing but a shell. After that, it was just Kaelan and the pack didn't raise children gently. They didn't coddle. They didn't comfort. They raised survivors. Or they buried the weak. By the time Kaelan turned 16, he'd killed 3 rival warriors in fair combat. By 20, his name alone made enemy scouts turn back at the border, whispering warnings to each other about the Black Wolf of Red Basin. He was 6'3" of muscle and scar tissue, with eyes the color of steel and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite by someone who'd run out of patience halfway through. His hands were always bruised, always bloody, always ready for the next fight. People feared him, respected him, kept their distance. And Kaelan was fine with that. Fear kept you alive out here. Fear kept your enemies from getting too close. Fear was the invisible wall between you and the grave. But there was one person he never wanted to frighten, one person who mattered more than his own survival, more than his reputation, more than anything else in this brutal, unforgiving world. Darius Cove, the future alpha of the Red Basin Pack. Kaelan's childhood friend. His brother in everything but blood. They grew up together in the same dirt, under the same merciless sun that baked the ground until it cracked. Darius was the alpha's son, destined for leadership from the moment he drew his first breath. Kaelan was nobody. An orphan, a stray, a kid who should have been crushed by the frontier's brutality before he hit puberty. But Darius saw something in him. "You're strong," Darius had said once, when they were both 12 and covered in mud from a training fight that had gotten out of hand. "Stronger than anyone I know, stronger than my father even, though don't tell him I said that." He'd grinned, wiping blood from his split lip. "One day, when I'm alpha, you'll stand with me. Not behind me, not beneath me, with me, as my beta, as my equal." Kaelan had believed him. He'd built his entire life around that promise, shaped himself into the kind of warrior Darius would need by his side. Every scar, every kill, every brutal lesson learned in blood, it was all for that future. They trained together under the old weapons master, a grizzled veteran who'd lost an eye and 3 fingers but could still disarm both of them at once. They fought together against rival packs, watching each other's backs when the violence got thick. They bled together, celebrated together, grew up together in a world that tried its hardest to kill them both. When Darius's father, the old alpha, finally stepped down, worn out by age and too many wars, his body more scar than skin, it was always understood. Darius would lead, and Kaelan would stand at his right hand. Beta, enforcer, shield, the bond that would tie them together until death. Kaelan never questioned it. Loyalty wasn't just a word to him. It was the foundation of everything he believed in, the only thing that made sense in a world that was otherwise chaos and violence and survival by any means necessary. He would have died for Darius, would have walked through fire, faced down armies, torn out his own heart if that's what it took. And one night, beneath a full moon that watched with cold indifference, he almost did. It started 3 days before the ceremony. Kaelan was running patrol along the eastern ridge, a jagged line of rocks and scrub brush that marked the boundary between Red Basin territory and the unclaimed wilds beyond. It was late afternoon, the sun hanging low and angry in a cloudless sky, turning everything the color of dried blood. The heat was oppressive, the kind that made you feel like you were breathing liquid fire. He was alone, preferred it that way. Easier to move, easier to think, easier to spot trouble before it spotted you. Plus, most of the pack couldn't keep up with him anyway. He moved like a shadow across the rocks, silent despite his size, eyes constantly scanning for threats. And then he caught a scent that didn't belong. Foreign wolves. 4 of them, maybe 5. Creeping too close to pack territory, trying to mask their smell with mud and distance, but failing because Kaelan's nose was too sharp, his instincts too honed. His lip curled back in a silent snarl. Drake's scouts. Had to be. Nobody else was stupid enough to push this close to Red Basin borders, especially not 3 days before a full moon ceremony when every warrior in the pack was on edge and spoiling for a fight. Kaelan shifted mid-stride, bones cracking and reforming in seconds, skin splitting to make way for fur and claws. The pain was intense. It always was, no matter how many times you did it. But he barely noticed anymore. Pain was just another constant in his life, like hunger or exhaustion, or the weight of the sky pressing down on everything. His wolf form was massive, easily twice the size of a normal gray. Black fur, scarred muzzle, eyes that glowed faint silver in the fading light. He looked like something out of a nightmare, which was exactly the point. He sprinted toward the intruders, paws thundering against stone, closing the distance in seconds. There were 4 of them, just like he'd thought. Border scouts from the Drake Kingdom, the wealthiest and most powerful pack in the region. They were well-fed, well-armed, and arrogant as hell. You could tell by the way they moved, casual and confident, like they owned the ground they walked on and everything around it. Kaelan hated them on sight. He hit the first one from the side, jaws closing around his throat before the scout even registered what was happening. The man went down in a spray of red, choking on his own blood, dead before he hit the ground. The second tried to run, made it maybe 10 yards before Kaelan caught him by the leg and dragged him back, claws tearing through muscle and bone. The scout screamed, high and terrified, until Kaelan snapped his spine with a single brutal shake. 2 fled, scrambling over the rocks in blind panic, leaving their weapons behind. Kaelan let them go. They'd spread the word. Tell everyone what happened to Drake's scouts, who pushed too far into Red Basin territory. Fear was a tool, and Kaelan knew how to use it. The 4th scout, a cocky beta with a fancy sword and armor that probably cost more than Kaelan's entire life, stood his ground. "Come on then," the scout spat, raising his blade with both hands. His voice shook just a little, betraying the fear his face tried to hide. "Let's see what the frontier's monster can do." Kaelan obliged. He lunged, claws extended, and the scout swung. The blade caught Kaelan across the ribs, a lucky slash that bit deep and drew blood and pain in equal measure. But Kaelan didn't slow down, didn't even flinch. He crashed into the scout like a battering ram, driving him to the ground, and then it was over. The scout's neck snapped with a wet crack that echoed off the rocks. Kaelan stood there for a moment, panting, blood dripping from his mouth and his side. The wound in his ribs wasn't deep. He'd had worse, much worse, but it stung like hell and would need cleaning before it got infected. He shifted back to human form, naked and bleeding, and started the long walk back to camp. When he arrived, Darius was waiting. He always seemed to know when Kaelan had been in a fight, some kind of instinct maybe, or just years of pattern recognition. They'd known each other so long they could read each other like open books. Or so Kaelan thought. "You're hurt," Darius said, frowning. He was standing outside the main hall, arms crossed, looking every inch the alpha in waiting. Tall, lean, with sharp features and dark hair that always seemed perfectly in place even in the middle of the wasteland. He wore his authority like a second skin, comfortable and natural. "I'm fine," Kaelan said, pressing a hand to his ribs. The bleeding had already stopped, one advantage of being a shifter, but the skin was still raw and angry. "You're always fine." Darius grabbed his arm, inspecting the wound with a critical eye. His touch was firm, but not rough. "You can't keep doing this, Kaelan. Charging in alone like you're invincible, like you've got nothing to lose." "I am invincible," Kaelan said with a grin, trying to lighten the mood. Haven't died yet, have I? Darius didn't smile back. His jaw tightened. One day you're going to get yourself killed. And then what? What am I supposed to do without you? Not die, Kaelan said simply. That's what you're supposed to do. That's the whole point. That's not what I... Darius stopped himself, shaking his head. Never mind. Kaelan studied his friend's face, trying to read what was going on behind those dark eyes. Something was off. Had been for weeks, actually, now that he thought about it. Darius had been distant, distracted, like his mind was somewhere else, even when he was standing right in front of you. You okay? Kaelan asked. I'm fine. You're lying, Darius sighed, running a hand through his hair. Listen, he said quietly, glancing around to make sure they were alone. After the ceremony, we need to talk. Kaelan frowned. About what? Just trust me. After the ceremony. It's important. Can't you tell me now? No. Darius's voice was firm, final. After. And that was it. He turned and walked away, leaving Kaelan standing there with a strange knot forming in his gut, cold and tight and uncomfortable. Something was wrong. Kaelan told himself it was nothing. Darius was probably just nervous about the ceremony. It was a big deal, after all. The moment when he'd officially become alpha, when the bond between him and his beta would be sealed under the full moon in front of the entire pack. That was a lot of pressure, but the knot didn't go away. It stayed with him through the next 3 days, growing tighter with every passing hour, until it felt like a fist clenched around his lungs. The full moon ceremony was sacred. It wasn't just a ritual, it was the foundation of pack law, the spiritual connection that bound an alpha to his chosen beta. The bond wasn't romantic, it wasn't about love or desire or anything physical. It was about power, trust, and unity. Two souls linked together, their fates intertwined until death. It was supposed to be unbreakable, stronger than steel, deeper than blood. Kaelan had been preparing for this moment his entire life. Every fight, every scar, every choice he'd made, it all led here, to this clearing, under this moon. He stood in the center of the space, dressed in ceremonial leather, simple, unadorned, the way frontier wolves preferred. No fancy embroidery, no precious metals, just tough, practical gear that could take a beating. The moonlight washed over him like a baptism, cold and clean and absolute. Around him the pack formed a circle. Warriors with scars and hard eyes. Elders with gray hair and memories stretching back decades. Families with children who watched wide-eyed and silent. Even the Omega servants, usually kept separate, had been allowed to attend. This was their future being written. Darius stepped forward. He looked different tonight, colder, more distant, like he was wearing a mask that didn't quite fit his face. Kaelan pushed down the unease. This was just nerves. Had to be. The elder Alpha, Darius's father, raised his staff, carved from ancient oak and wrapped in strips of leather and bone. He began the ritual chant, his voice deep and resonant, carrying across the clearing. The words were old, older than the pack itself, passed down through generations in a language most of them didn't even understand anymore. But understanding wasn't the point. Feeling was. Kaelan felt the pull immediately, a strange electric sensation that started in his chest and spread through his entire body like fire in his veins. It was the bond forming, reaching out across the space between them, searching for its anchor, trying to connect with Darius's soul. This was it. The moment everything changed, the moment all his loyalty, all his sacrifice, all his years of service would be recognized and rewarded. And then Darius spoke. I reject this bond. The words hit like a punch to the throat. Kaelan blinked, certain he'd misheard. The chanting stopped. The clearing went dead silent. What? Kaelan managed. Darius's face was stone. No emotion, no warmth, nothing but cold, calculated certainty. I reject you, Kaelan Vire. You are not my beta. You are not my brother. You are nothing to me. The clearing erupted in gasps and whispers, the crowd shifting and murmuring like a disturbed hive. This wasn't done. This never happened. Rejecting a bond during the ceremony was unforgivable. Kaelan couldn't breathe. His chest felt like it was caving in, ribs cracking under invisible pressure. Darius, why would you? You're a weapon, Darius said, his voice carrying across the clearing, making sure everyone heard. That's all you've ever been. A tool I used to protect myself while I got stronger. A blunt instrument I pointed at my enemies when I needed someone hurt or killed. Each word was a knife. But I don't need you anymore, Darius continued. I'm strong enough on my own now. And you? You're too dangerous to keep around. Too violent, too unstable, too loyal to the old ways. I'm loyal to you, Kaelan said, and hated how his voice cracked. Exactly. Darius smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You do anything I asked. Kill anyone. Destroy anything. That kind of loyalty is useful. Until it's not. Until I need allies who understand politics, not just violence. Until I need people who can think, not just fight. The bond snapped. It felt like someone had reached into Kaelan's chest, grabbed his heart, and ripped it out through his spine. He staggered, clutching at his ribs, trying to breathe through the searing pain that was tearing him apart from the inside. It was agony, pure and absolute, like every nerve in his body was being burned away. He fell to his knees. Why? He rasped, looking up at Darius with eyes that burned. After everything. Why? Darius didn't answer. He just nodded to someone behind Kaelan. Kaelan turned, too slow, too dazed, too broken. A blade pierced his back, sliding between his ribs with surgical precision, cold steel, sharp and merciless, punching through muscle and scraping bone. He gasped, choking on blood, and looked down to see the tip protruding from his chest, slick and red in the moonlight. Behind him stood Garrett, one of Darius's most trusted warriors, a man Kaelan had trained with for years, fought beside, trusted with his life. Garrett twisted the blade. The pain was incredible, blinding, white-hot and all-consuming. Kaelan's vision blurred, his legs gave out completely, and he collapsed forward onto his hands and knees. Blood poured from his mouth, from the wound, pooling beneath him in the dirt. Nothing personal, Garrett muttered, pulling the blade free with a wet sound. Kaelan tried to speak, but his throat was full of blood. He coughed, spitting red, and looked up at Darius one last time, searching desperately for some hint of regret, some trace of the boy he'd grown up with, the friend he'd loved like a brother. There was nothing, just cold calculation. You were useful once, Darius said softly, crouching down so they were eye level. I'll give you that. You kept me alive when I was weak, killed my enemies, made people fear me by association. But now? Now you're a liability, too strong, too respected. People look to you instead of me, and I can't have that. An alpha needs to stand alone. Kaelan wanted to scream, to curse him, to tear him apart, but he couldn't even breathe. Goodbye, Kaelan, Darius said, standing up. Thank you for your service. Then he turned and walked away, his boots crunching on the gravel. Kaelan slumped forward, his hands pressed against the wound in his chest, trying uselessly to stop the bleeding. His fingers were slick with blood, trembling from shock and pain, and the poison he could feel burning through his veins now, because of course there was poison on the blade, making sure he wouldn't survive even if someone tried to help. Around him, the pack just stared. No one moved to help him. No one spoke in his defense. They'd already written him off. Already accepted Darius's version of reality. He was a tool that had outlived its usefulness. He was already dead. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was the moon, cold and indifferent, hanging above like a silent witness to his murder. It didn't care. The universe didn't care. He'd spent his whole life fighting, bleeding, sacrificing, and it meant nothing. He'd been discarded like trash. And then there was nothing, just darkness, and silence, and the taste of blood. He should have died. He wanted to die. The pain, the betrayal, the sheer crushing weight of it all, it was too much, too brutal, too final. Death would have been a mercy, a release from the agony and the humiliation and the unbearable knowledge that everything he'd believed in was a lie. But death, it seemed, had other plans. When Kaelan opened his eyes again, and he had no idea how long it had been, hours or days or weeks, the first thing he noticed was the ceiling. It was too clean, too ornate. Carved wooden beams painted with gold leaf and delicate floral patterns that seemed to dance in the soft lamplight. The kind of craftsmanship that cost more money than most frontier packs saw in a year. This wasn't the Red Basin. This wasn't anywhere near the frontier. He tried to sit up, and that's when he realized something was very, very wrong. His body didn't respond the way it should. Everything felt off, too light, too small, too soft, like he was moving through water or wearing someone else's skin. Panic surged through him, sharp and immediate. He scrambled out of bed, nearly fell because his legs were shorter than they should be, his center of gravity all wrong, and stumbled to the mirror on the far wall. The reflection staring back at him was impossible. A young woman, maybe 20 years old, if that. Delicate features, high cheekbones, full lips that looked like they'd never been split in a fight. Smooth skin unmarred by scars. Dark hair that cascaded past slender shoulders in soft waves that caught the light. And her eyes. Violet. Impossibly, unnaturally violet, like gemstones. Kaelan touched her face with trembling fingers, and the reflection did the same. "What the hell?" he whispered. The voice wasn't his either. It was soft, melodic, feminine, the kind of voice that had never screamed a war cry or snarled a threat. He staggered backward, heart hammering against ribs that felt too fragile, breath coming in short gasps. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. This was a nightmare. A hallucination brought on by poison and blood loss, but the room didn't waver, didn't fade. It was solid, real. He was standing here, breathing, alive, in someone else's body. The door opened. Kaelan spun around, every instinct screaming at him to fight or flee, but before he could do either, a maid stepped inside carrying a breakfast tray. She was middle-aged, plump, with kind eyes, and a smile that seemed genuine. "Lady Lyra," she said cheerfully, setting the tray down on a small table near the window. "You're awake. Oh, thank the heavens. We were so worried. You've been unconscious for 2 whole days. The physician said it was touch and go for a while, that the poison had done terrible damage, but you're strong. You pulled through." Kaelan just stared at her, unable to form words. "Lady Lyra?" he managed finally. The maid's smile faltered slightly. "Are you feeling all right, my lady? You look very pale. Should I fetch the physician, or perhaps some water?" "No," Kaelan said quickly, forcing himself to breathe normally. "No, I'm fine." The maid didn't look convinced. "Are you sure? You gave us quite a scare. Her Majesty has been asking about you every day. She'll be so relieved to hear you're awake." "Her Majesty?" "The Queen, my lady." The maid gave him a strange look now, concern creeping into her expression. "Lady Lyra, are you certain you're all right? Perhaps the poison affected your memory." "Maybe," Kaelan said, grasping at the excuse. "Everything's a bit foggy." "Oh, you poor thing," the maid bustled over, genuine sympathy on her face. "Don't you worry, I'm sure it will all come back. You just need rest and good food. I'll have cook prepare your favorite soup." "Thank you," Kaelan said automatically. The maid bobbed a curtsy and left, closing the door softly behind her. Kaelan stood there in the middle of the room, trembling from head to toe, trying to process what was happening. He was alive. Somehow, impossibly, against all logic and reason, he was alive. But he wasn't Kaelan Vire anymore. He was Lyra Vale, a noblewoman, an Omega, if the maid's deferential tone was anything to go by. And judging by the lavish room, the servants, the casual mention of royalty, he was somewhere very, very far from the Red Basin territory. He walked back to the mirror on unsteady legs and stared at the stranger's face again. "Who are you?" he whispered to the reflection. The violet eyes stared back, offering no answers. It took him 3 days to piece together the truth. 3 days of pretending to be sick, of lying in bed and listening carefully to everything the servants said when they thought he wasn't paying attention. 3 days of carefully asking questions that wouldn't reveal how little he actually knew about his own supposed life. The picture that emerged was complicated. Lyra Vale was the youngest daughter of a minor noble family from the outer provinces. A small house called House Vale that had just enough land and influence to matter in regional politics, but not enough wealth or military strength to protect itself from larger predators. 6 months ago, there'd been some kind of dispute. An accusation of treason, though the details were vague and contradictory depending on who was telling the story. House Vale had been suspected of supporting a rival claimant to the throne, or maybe just of not supporting the current king enthusiastically enough. Either way, to prove their loyalty and avoid being wiped out entirely, They'd sent their youngest daughter to the royal capital as part of a diplomatic exchange, a polite term for what was essentially a hostage situation. Lyra had been nobody important, a pawn on a board she didn't even know existed. Pretty enough to be decorative at court functions, but with no real power, no influential connections, no way to defend herself if things went bad. And a week ago, or maybe 8 days, the timeline was fuzzy, things had gone very bad. Poison. Someone had poisoned her tea. Meant for someone else, probably, the servants whispered. A mistake. Wrong cup delivered to the wrong room. Lyra Vale had drunk it and died within hours. The physicians had confirmed it. Dead. No heartbeat, no breath, body already going cold. They'd prepared her for burial, laid her out in the mortuary chapel, started sending word to her family. And then, 6 hours later, her heart had started beating again. The night physician had nearly had a heart attack himself when he'd walked in to find her sitting up on the preparation table, gasping for air. No one knew why. The head physician called it a miracle. The court priest said it was divine intervention. The more superstitious servants whispered about dark magic and deals with demons. Kaelan knew better. He didn't understand the mechanics of it. Reincarnation, soul transfer, some kind of magic he didn't have a name for, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The universe had given him a second chance. A chance to survive. A chance to get stronger. A chance for revenge. And he wasn't going to waste it. The first few weeks were hell. Kaelan had spent his entire adult life, his entire life, really, as a warrior. His body had been a weapon, honed through years of brutal training, scarred and strong and built for violence. He'd known exactly what it could do, exactly how far he could push it before something broke. Now he was trapped in a frame that could barely lift a dinner plate without trembling. He tried once, in secret, snuck down to the palace training grounds late at night when the guards were changing shifts and nobody was paying attention. Found a practice sword leaning against the wall. Nothing fancy, just basic steel, the kind squires used. He picked it up. The weight nearly dislocated his shoulder. Pain shot down his arm, and he dropped the sword with a clatter, biting back a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush. This body was useless, weak, fragile. Everything he'd spent his life avoiding, everything he'd been taught to despise. He wanted to scream, wanted to punch something, break something, destroy something, just to prove he still could. But his hands were so small and delicate he'd probably just break his own fingers. So he paced instead, walking circles around the empty courtyard like a caged animal, trying to burn off the rage and helplessness that threatened to consume him whole. This wasn't fair. He'd survived the frontier, survived poverty, starvation, violence, betrayal, murder, and now he was stuck in a body that couldn't even defend itself against a strong breeze. But as the days passed, as he forced himself to adapt, because adaptation was what he did, what he'd always done, Kaelan began to notice something else, something useful. People didn't see him. Oh, they looked at him, stared even. Lyra was beautiful. Objectively, undeniably beautiful. In the royal court, where appearance was currency and beauty could open doors that gold couldn't, she turned heads wherever she went. But they didn't see him. Not really. Not the person underneath. To them, Lyra was just another pretty omega. Decorative, harmless, inconsequential. A lovely piece of furniture that made the room look better. They spoke freely around her, assuming she didn't understand politics or power or anything more complex than choosing which dress to wear. They dismissed her opinions when she dared to offer them, patting her hand like she was a child who'd said something cute but ultimately meaningless. They ignored her presence when it suited them, conducting business and making deals right in front of her like she wasn't even there. And slowly, carefully, Kaelan realized something. This was an advantage. Invisibility was a weapon, too. Maybe the most powerful weapon he'd ever had. He'd spent his whole life being seen as a threat. His size, his scars, his reputation, they'd preceded him everywhere, made people wary and cautious and ready to fight. Now, for the first time, he could move without being watched, listen without being heard, learn without being challenged. So he started paying attention. Really paying attention. The royal court was a battlefield, just like the frontier. But the weapons here weren't claws and teeth and honest violence. They were words, carefully chosen, alliances, carefully cultivated, secrets, carefully hoarded, Debts and favors and promises that meant everything or nothing depending on who was listening. People killed each other here with smiles and polite conversation, destroyed lives with a whispered rumor at the right dinner party, ended bloodlines with a strategic marriage or a well-timed accusation. It was brutal in a way the frontier never was, because at least in the Red Basin, when someone wanted you dead, they had the decency to try and kill you to your face. Here, they poisoned you and called it an accident. Kaelan had always been a fighter. Now he needed to become something else, a student, a spy, a strategist. He started reading everything he could get his hands on: court records, historical texts, maps of territorial disputes, genealogies of noble houses. He listened to gossip with the kind of attention most people reserve for battle plans. He watched how people moved around each other, who deferred to whom, who smiled at someone's face, and then immediately whispered to their companion the moment that person's back was turned. He learned. And he waited, awed. It was during a court banquet 6 weeks after her awakening that Kaelan first saw him. Crown Alpha Lucien Drake, the heir to the kingdom, the son of the most powerful alpha in the entire region. The enemy. Kaelan had fought against Drake's soldiers before, back when he was still himself. Hell, he'd killed some of them. The Drakes were everything the Red Basin wasn't: wealthy, organized, disciplined, ruthless in a way that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with expansion, conquest, ambition. They didn't fight because they had to. They fought because they wanted to, because they could. And Lucien was their crown prince, the future king. He entered the banquet hall like he owned it, which technically he did. The entire palace, the entire capital city, the entire kingdom would be his one day. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of unconscious grace that came from a lifetime of training. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble by a master sculptor. His eyes were amber, sharp, and calculating, the kind of eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. He wore his authority like a second skin, comfortable and natural, like he'd been born knowing he was better than everyone else in the room and had spent his entire life having that belief confirmed. Everyone in the hall turned to look at him, including Kaelan. Their eyes met across the crowd. For just a moment, a heartbeat, maybe less. Something flickered in Lucien's expression. Curiosity, interest, recognition, almost, though that was impossible. He'd never met Lyra before, never even heard of her probably. Then he smiled. It was a slow, deliberate smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, the kind of smile predators gave prey when they were feeling playful. And he started walking toward her. Every instinct Kaelan had, instincts honed over decades of violence and survival, screamed at him to run, to get out, to put as much distance as possible between himself and this dangerous, powerful man. But Lyra Vale wouldn't run. Lyra Vale was a noble woman, polite and proper and utterly unthreatening, so Kaelan stood his ground, fingers tightening around the wine glass in his hand until he was afraid it might shatter. "Lady Lyra," Lucien said smoothly, stopping in front of her. Up close he was even more imposing, easily a head taller than her, radiating power and confidence like heat from a forge. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced." "We haven't," Kaelan said carefully, keeping his voice neutral and his expression pleasant. "Then allow me to remedy that oversight." Lucien took her hand, his hand, and brushed his lips against her knuckles in a gesture that was probably supposed to be charming and courtly. Kaelan resisted the urge to punch him in the throat. "Crown Alpha Lucien Drake," Lucien said, his amber eyes never leaving her face. "At your service, my lady." "A pleasure," Kaelan said, the lie smooth and practiced. Lucien didn't let go of her hand. His thumb traced a small circle on her wrist, just above the pulse point. Testing, maybe. Or just being possessive. "You're new to court," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am." "How are you finding it?" "Loud," Kaelan said before he could stop himself. Lucien laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised Kaelan. "That's putting it mildly. Most people say elegant or refined, when what they really mean is boring and full of pompous idiots." "I didn't say boring, I said loud." "Fair enough." Lucien's eyes studied her face with an intensity that made Kaelan's skin crawl, searching for something, though Kaelan had no idea what. You're different from the other ladies at court. Different how?
I haven't quite figured that out yet, Lucian admitted. But I will. He finally released her hand, but he didn't step back. Didn't create distance. I look forward to seeing more of you, Lady Lyra, he said, his voice dropping just slightly, becoming something more intimate, more dangerous. And then, before Kaelan could respond, before he could figure out what the hell was happening, Lucian turned and walked away, moving back into the crowd with the same easy confidence he'd had entering, leaving Kaelan standing there with a racing heart and a very dangerous problem. The Crown Alpha was interested in Lyra Vale, and Kaelan had absolutely no idea what to do about it. What? That night, alone in his room with the door locked and the curtains drawn, Kaelan stared at his reflection in the mirror. Lyra's face stared back, violet eyes wide and uncertain in the lamplight. "What are you doing?" he whispered to himself. He didn't have an answer, didn't have a plan beyond surviving one day at a time. All he knew was that Darius was still out there somewhere, still alive, still rising in power, probably being celebrated as the new Alpha of Red Basin, probably telling everyone how sad he was about his loyal beta's tragic death. And Kaelan, Lyra, was here, trapped in the heart of enemy territory in a body that couldn't fight. Weak, alone, but not helpless. Never helpless. He clenched his fists, watching the delicate fingers curl into something that almost resembled a weapon. If he couldn't fight like a warrior anymore, he'd fight like something else. He'd learn this world inside and out, master its rules, become someone even kings couldn't ignore. He'd make alliances, gather secrets like other people gathered gold, build power from absolutely nothing. And when the time came, when he was finally ready, he'd make Darius pay for everything. Not with claws, not with blades or honest violence, with something far worse. The truth. The kind of truth that destroyed reputations, shattered carefully built alliances, brought down empires from the inside. Kaelan smiled at his reflection, and for the first time since waking up in this body, he felt something other than rage and despair and helplessness. He felt purpose, cold, clear, absolute. "You wanted me dead," he whispered to the memory of Darius's face. "You should have made absolutely certain I stayed that way." Outside, the moon rose over the palace, full and bright and cold. Watching. Waiting. Patient. And somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a sound that carried on the night wind, lonely and defiant and alive. The palace library became Kaelan's sanctuary. It was a massive room on the third floor of the East Wing, filled with more books than he'd ever seen in his entire life. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with leather-bound volumes on everything from military strategy to obscure poetry to genealogies of noble houses going back centuries. The smell of old paper and ink hung in the air like incense, and the light filtered through tall windows in dusty golden shafts that made the whole space feel suspended in time. Nobody came here except the occasional scholar, and even they kept to themselves, hunched over their work at scattered tables, muttering to themselves about footnotes and citations. Perfect. Kaelan spent hours here every day, his back pressed against the far corner where he could see both entrances. Old habits died hard. Even in this soft body, even surrounded by books instead of weapons, his instincts demanded he never let anyone approach unseen. He'd positioned himself so that the afternoon sun wouldn't be in his eyes, so he'd have a clear line of sight to anyone entering, so his escape routes were mapped and ready. Like he was setting up a defensive position instead of just reading. Because that's what he was doing, really, defending himself, learning the terrain, understanding the enemy. He was 3 chapters into a dense treatise on border treaties and territorial negotiations when someone cleared their throat directly in front of him. Kaelan's head snapped up, adrenaline spiking. He hadn't heard anyone approach, which meant he was getting sloppy, or this person was very good at moving quietly. An older woman stood a few feet away, watching him with sharp, intelligent eyes. She was perhaps 50, dressed in the dark green robes of a senior court advisor, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun that looked like it could cut glass. Her posture was perfect, her hands folded neatly in front of her, everything about her radiating controlled authority. "Lady Lyra," the woman said. Her voice was crisp, educated, the kind that expected to be obeyed. "I'm Lady Margot Thane, the Queen's chief advisor on domestic affairs." Kaelan closed the book carefully, using the moment to steady his racing heart. "An honor to meet you, Lady Margot."
Is it? Margot's smile was thin, more of a knife edge than an expression of warmth. Most young ladies at court find me rather intimidating. They tend to make excuses and flee when I approach. I'm not most young ladies.
No, Margot agreed, her eyes scanning him from head to toe in a way that felt invasive,
Like she was taking his measure and finding him wanting, or maybe finding him too interesting. You're not, are you? Tell me, what's a minor noble from the outer provinces doing reading Valdres's essays on strategic diplomacy? That's not exactly light entertainment. Most girls your age are reading romance novels or poetry. Kaelan kept his expression neutral, even as his mind raced. He'd been careless. Should have grabbed something more age-appropriate, more fitting for his cover. I'm trying to understand how this place works. Why? Because I don't like being ignorant. Margot's laugh was sharp and barking, like a fox's cry. Honest, I appreciate that. Most people at court lie so reflexively they've forgotten what truth sounds like. They'd rather tell you what they think you want to hear than risk offending you with reality. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat without asking permission, settling in like she planned to stay a while. Word is spread about your little resurrection. Half the court thinks you're blessed by divine intervention. The other half thinks you're cursed, possibly possessed by something dark and unnatural. What do you think?
I think I'm alive, Kaelan said carefully. That's all that matters. Practical. Margot folded her hands on the table, and Kaelan noticed they were covered in rings, gold, silver, one with a ruby the size of his thumbnail. Signs of wealth and power. I'm going to be direct with you, Lady Lyra, because I believe in cutting through nonsense when possible. The Crown Alpha has taken an interest in you. Kaelan's stomach tightened, but he kept his face blank. I noticed. Do you understand what that means? That my life just got more complicated. That's one way to put it. Margot leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice even though they were alone. Lucian Drake is not a man who takes interest lightly. When he wants something, a treaty, an alliance, a piece of information, he gets it. He's patient, strategic, and utterly ruthless when necessary. And right now, for reasons I don't entirely understand, he wants to know more about you.
I can't imagine why, Kaelan said, forcing his voice to stay light, almost dismissive. I'm nobody. A hostage from a minor house with no wealth, no connections, no value. That's what makes it interesting? Margot's eyes narrowed, studying him like he was a puzzle she was determined to solve. You have no powerful family backing you, no wealth to speak of, no connections worth mentioning in the grand scheme of court politics. You should be invisible, just another pretty face among hundreds, forgotten before the week is out. But you're not. There's something about you that caught his attention, something that doesn't quite add up. Kaelan forced himself to meet her gaze without flinching. Maybe he just likes my face. Maybe. Margot didn't sound convinced. Her fingers drummed once on the table, a small gesture that somehow felt threatening. Or maybe he sees what I see. Someone who's pretending to be something they're not. Someone who looks at this court like a battlefield instead of a dance floor. Someone who reads military strategy instead of love poetry. Someone who carries themselves like they know how to fight even though their body clearly doesn't. The words hit too close to the truth, way too close. Kaelan felt ice slide down his spine, but he kept his expression mildly confused. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? Margot stood slowly, smoothing down her robes. Let me give you some advice, girl. Whatever game you're playing, whatever secrets you're hiding, be very, very careful. This court has eaten people far more experienced than you. People with money and armies and generations of political savvy. They came here thinking they were clever, thinking they could manipulate the system to their advantage. Most of them are dead now, or ruined, or both. And if Lucian decides you're a threat instead of a curiosity... She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. The implication hung in the air like smoke. She walked away, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor, leaving Kaelan sitting there with his heart pounding against his ribs. He'd been too obvious, too careless with his behavior, his reading choices, the way he moved and spoke and existed in this world. In trying to learn about his enemies, to understand the battlefield, he'd revealed himself as someone worth watching, someone dangerous. He needed to be smarter, more careful, better at playing the role of harmless Omega nobility, or he'd end up dead again. And this time, there wouldn't be a convenient resurrection to save him. 3 days later, a formal invitation arrived. It was delivered by a palace servant dressed in the royal livery, deep blue with gold trim, the kind of uniform that cost more than most frontier families earned in a year. The servant presented it on a silver tray like it was made of spun gold instead of paper and ink. Kaelan unfolded it carefully. Lady Lyra Vale is cordially invited to join Crown Alpha Lucian Drake for afternoon tea in the Rose Garden. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Please send your response at your earliest convenience. The handwriting was elegant, flowing, clearly written by a professional scribe. But at the bottom, in a different hand, bolder, more aggressive, was a single line. I hope you'll say yes. L. Kaelan stared at the elegant script, his mind racing through possibilities and implications. This wasn't a request. Despite the polite wording, despite the courteous phrasing, this was a command disguised as an invitation. Crown Alphas didn't invite minor nobles to private tea parties because they genuinely wanted to get to know them better. They did it because they wanted something. Information, leverage, entertainment, or just the satisfaction of exercising their power. He could refuse. Claim illness, fabricate a family emergency, invent some excuse that would sound plausible enough. But that would only delay the inevitable. And worse, it would make him look weak, afraid, like he had something to hide. He'd spent his whole life never backing down from a challenge, never showing fear, even when he was terrified inside. He wasn't about to start now. Tell His Highness, I accept with pleasure, he said to the waiting servant. The man bowed and left, and Kaelan was alone with the invitation and his racing thoughts. The next afternoon, Kaelan dressed with more care than he'd ever taken with anything in his entire life. Ellen, his maid, a cheerful woman in her 30s with kind eyes and work-roughened hands, helped him into a gown of deep blue silk that shimmered when it caught the light. The fabric was so fine it felt like water against his skin, probably worth more than everything Kaelan had owned in his previous life combined. This color brings out your eyes, my lady, Ellen said, adjusting the fit across his shoulders. You'll look absolutely stunning. She arranged his hair in an elaborate style that probably took years to master, weaving in small silver pins that caught the light, applied subtle cosmetics that enhanced features Kaelan barely recognized as his own, added a simple silver necklace with a small sapphire pendant. When she was finally satisfied, she stepped back with a proud smile. You look beautiful, my lady, like something from a painting. Kaelan looked at his reflection in the full-length mirror and saw a stranger, a pretty doll dressed up for display, everything soft and delicate and utterly unthreatening. But underneath the silk and the carefully arranged hair and the cosmetics, he was still a frontier wolf, still a killer with blood on his hands and murder in his heart. He just needed people to keep forgetting that. The rose garden lived up to its name, and then some. Hundreds of roses in every color imaginable, red, white, pink, yellow, deep purple, even some that looked almost black in certain light. Their scent was heavy and sweet in the afternoon air, almost overwhelming, mixing with the smell of fresh-cut grass and the fountain that bubbled somewhere nearby. White gravel paths wound between meticulously maintained flower beds, leading to a small pavilion in the center where a table had been set for two. It was beautiful in the way that only excessive wealth could create, perfect and manicured and utterly artificial. Lucien was already there, dressed in dark clothes that made him look like a blade wrapped in human skin. Black jacket over a crisp white shirt, dark trousers, boots so polished they reflected the afternoon sun. He stood when he saw Kaelan approaching, his posture perfect, his expression unreadable. Lady Lyra, he said, and his voice was warm, welcoming, completely at odds with the calculating look in his amber eyes. Thank you for accepting my invitation. Did I have a choice? Kaelan asked before he could stop himself. The words came out sharper than intended, more challenging than an Omega should ever sound when addressing a Crown Alpha. But Lucien just smiled, and for once it seemed genuine. Of course you had a choice. You could have refused. I would have been disappointed, certainly, but I would have respected your decision. Would you? Probably not, Lucien admitted with disarming honesty. I would have just invited you again, and again, until you either agreed to meet with me or left the palace entirely to escape my persistence. Kaelan sat in the chair Lucien held out for him, hyper-aware of how close the Crown Alpha was standing, how easy it would be for him to reach out and touch. Persistence is a virtue, I suppose. So is curiosity. Lucien returned to his own seat and began pouring tea from an ornate silver pot. The liquid was dark amber, fragrant with herbs Kaelan didn't recognize. Expensive stuff, judging by the smell and the delicate porcelain cups. And you, Lady Lyra, are the most curious thing to happen at this court in years. I'm not that interesting. You came back from the dead. That's fairly interesting by any standard. The physicians said it was a mistake, that my heart hadn't actually stopped, just slowed to the point where they couldn't detect it. The physicians are idiots, Lucien said bluntly, his tone casual despite the harsh words. I read their reports personally. Every single one of them. You were dead for 6 hours. No heartbeat, no breath, body temperature dropping toward ambient. They'd already started preparing you for burial. Then suddenly, impossibly, you weren't dead anymore. That doesn't happen by accident or medical error. Kaelan's hand tightened on his teacup, the porcelain cold against his palm. What are you suggesting?
I don't know. Lucien leaned back in his chair, studying him with an intensity that made Kaelan's skin crawl. That's what bothers me. I'm very good at reading people, Lady Lyra. It's a necessary skill when you're surrounded by courtiers who smile to your face while planning your assassination. I can usually tell within minutes of meeting someone what they want, what they fear, what they'll do under pressure. But you, I can't read you at all. Maybe there's nothing to read, or maybe you're very, very good at hiding. Lucien took a sip of his tea, watching Kaelan over the rim of the cup. Tell me about yourself. Your family. Your home. Where you came from before fate brought you to this palace. Kaelan had prepared for this, had spent hours over the past weeks memorizing the details of Lyra's life, from conversations with her servants, from the few letters she'd left behind, from court records and family histories he'd dug up in the library. House Vale is small, he said carefully, keeping his voice neutral and pleasant. We have lands in the northern provinces, mostly farmland and some timber forests. Nothing particularly valuable or strategic. My father is Baron Thomas Vale. My mother died when I was young. Fever, they said. I have 2 older brothers who will inherit the estate when my father passes. All true, according to the records he'd found. And you were sent here as a hostage, Lucien said. Not a question, a statement of fact. A diplomatic guest, Kaelan corrected, using the euphemism everyone at court pretended to believe. A hostage, Lucien repeated flatly. Let's not pretend otherwise, Lady Lyra. Your father's loyalty to the crown was questioned, unfairly perhaps, but questioned nonetheless. So he handed over his youngest daughter to prove he wouldn't betray us. A living guarantee of his good behavior. How does that make you feel? The question caught him off guard. Not the fact of it. He'd known the basics of Lyra's situation from the beginning, but the way Lucien asked, like he actually cared about the answer instead of just testing her reactions. Why do you care? Kaelan asked. Because I want to understand you. Why? Because you're different, Lucien said again, and there was a note of frustration in his voice that sounded genuine. Everyone at this court is so predictable, it's almost boring. The ambitious ones want power and will do anything to get it. The greedy ones want gold and land and titles. The vain ones want admiration and beauty and to be remembered. But you? You don't seem to want anything at all. You just watch, observe, like you're studying us instead of trying to join us, like you're waiting for something. He was too perceptive, dangerously, impossibly perceptive. Kaelan needed to deflect, to redirect, to give him something that sounded true without actually revealing anything important. Maybe I'm just waiting to go home, he said quietly. Are you? I don't know. That at least was honest. He had no home anymore. The frontier was lost to him forever. Kaelan Vire was dead and buried, and even if he somehow reclaimed that identity, what would he return to? A pack that had stood by and watched him die? House Vale wasn't his home either. He was wearing a dead girl's skin, living a dead girl's life. He was adrift, unmoored, anchored only by his need for revenge. I suppose home is wherever I am at the moment. Lucien set down his cup with a soft click of porcelain on porcelain. Would you like to know what I think, Lady Lyra? I suspect you're going to tell me regardless of what I want. I think something happened to you, Lucien said quietly, leaning forward slightly. Something terrible and transformative. And when you woke up in that mortuary chapel, gasping for air with death still clinging to your skin, you weren't quite the same person who died. Maybe the experience changed you fundamentally. Maybe facing death and coming back gives people a kind of clarity the rest of us can't comprehend.
But you're not a frightened girl playing at court politics because she has no other choice. You're something else entirely. Kaelan's pulse hammered in his throat, but he kept his expression neutral. You have quite an imagination, Your Highness. Do I? Lucian stood smoothly, walking around the table until he was standing directly beside Kaelan's chair. Close enough to touch. Close enough that Kaelan could smell whatever expensive cologne he wore, could feel the heat radiating from his body. Look at me. It wasn't a request. Kaelan looked up, meeting those amber eyes that saw far too much. You're not afraid of me, Lucian observed, his voice soft and almost curious. Everyone else in this palace is afraid of me, even if they hide it well behind smiles and flattery. The servants flinch when I walk by. The nobles calculate every word they say in my presence. Even my own father watches me sometimes like I'm a wolf that might turn on him. But not you. Why is that? Because Kaelan had stared down alpha wolves twice Lucian's size and killed them with his bare hands while they were still trying to rip his throat out. Because he'd faced death more times than he could count and come out the other side covered in blood and still standing, still fighting. Because compared to watching your best friend stab you in the heart and leave you to bleed out under a cold moon, one wealthy prince was barely worth noticing. But he couldn't say any of that. Maybe I'm just stupid, he said instead, keeping his tone light. Too ignorant to know I should be terrified. Lucy Yen laughed, a real laugh startled out of him. You're many things, Lady Lyra. Stupid isn't remotely one of them. He reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving Kaelan plenty of time to pull away if he wanted. His fingers brushed a strand of hair away from her face, tucking it gently behind her ear. The touch was light, almost tender, completely at odds with the power he radiated. Every muscle in Kaelan's body went rigid.
Relax, Lucian said softly, his hand still hovering near her face. I'm not going to hurt you. Despite what the rumors might suggest, I don't make a habit of terrorizing young ladies at tea parties. Aren't you? Kaelan's voice came out rougher than intended. No. Lucian's hand dropped back to his side, and he stepped away, giving Kaelan space to breathe again. I just wanted to talk to you, to see if my instincts were right about you being different, being more than you appear. And? They were. Lucian's smile was sharp now, all pretense of gentleness gone. You're hiding something, Lady Lyra, something important, something that makes you different from every other person in this palace, and I'm going to figure out what it is. He said it like a promise, or a threat, or maybe both at once. Kaelan stood carefully, smoothing down his dress with hands that wanted to shake, but didn't because he wouldn't let them. Thank you for the tea, Your Highness. It was enlightening. We should do this again, Lucian said. Should we? I think so. His smile widened slightly. After all, we have so much more to discuss. So many questions left unanswered. So many mysteries to unravel. Kaelan left the garden with his heart racing and his mind spinning through possibilities and dangers. Lucian suspected something. Maybe not the full impossible truth, that would be beyond anyone's imagination, but enough to be dangerous, enough to watch him more closely, to dig deeper, to eventually find inconsistencies that couldn't be explained away. He needed to be more careful, or he needed to make sure Lucian's attention shifted elsewhere before the Crown Alpha got too close to the truth. The opportunity came a week later, in the form of a scandal that rocked the court like an earthquake. Lady Helena Morse, a high-ranking noblewoman with connections to 3 different duchies and enough wealth to buy a small kingdom, was caught having an affair. Not just any affair, an affair with a guard. And not just any guard, her own husband's personal bodyguard, a man Lord Morse had trusted completely to protect his household and his honor. The court exploded with gossip like a kicked anthill. Kaelan watched from the sidelines, fascinated by the mechanics of it. How information spread through whispers and meaningful looks. How reputations that had taken decades to build crumbled in hours. How alliances shifted and fractured based on who had known what and when. Who had tried to warn Lord Morse and been ignored. Who had covered for Lady Helena. Who had benefited from her distraction and disgrace. And he learned.
The real power at court wasn't held by the people with the loudest voices or the biggest armies or even the most money. It was held by the ones who controlled the whispers, the ones who knew which secrets to reveal and which to keep buried, the ones who could destroy someone with a carefully placed rumor or save them with strategic silence. Information was the currency here, more valuable than gold. Secrets were weapons that never dulled. Kaelan could work with that. He started building a network, carefully and quietly. Not the powerful people. They were too well guarded, too suspicious, too surrounded by their own networks of spies and informants. Instead, he focused on the invisible ones, the servants. They moved through the palace like ghosts, seeing everything, hearing everything, remembered by no one because nobles had stopped seeing servants as real people centuries ago. Ellen, his maid, was the first. Over weeks of careful conversation, Kaelan learned that her sister worked in the Crown Alpha's household, cleaning his rooms and laundering his clothes, that her brother was a stable hand who knew which nobles kept which horses, who rode out at odd hours, who met with whom in supposedly secret locations outside the palace walls. He befriended a laundress named Petra, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who knew everyone's secrets based on the stains she cleaned from their clothes. Wine stains from drinking too much, blood from fights or duels or darker things. Other substances she wouldn't name directly but hinted at with knowing looks and meaningful silences. A kitchen boy named Thomas, barely 15, who heard everything because nobles never bothered to lower their voices around someone delivering their meals. They'd discuss treason and affairs and murder plots while Thomas stood there with a platter of food, invisible and ignored. Kaelan didn't ask for information directly. That would have been too obvious, too suspicious, too likely to get back to the wrong people. Instead, he was kind to them, actually kind, in a way that was rare enough at court to be remarkable. He remembered their names when most nobles couldn't be bothered, asked about their lives, their families, their problems. Listened when they talked instead of just waiting for them to stop making noise. Slipped them coins when he could afford it, which wasn't often given his own limited resources, but even a little generosity went a long way when you were used to being treated like furniture. And slowly, carefully, they started talking to him, telling him things. Like which council members were planning to oppose the king's new tax legislation and why. Which noble houses were secretly meeting to discuss marriage alliances that would shift the balance of power toward the northern territories. Which merchants were smuggling restricted goods through the eastern port and paying off the harbor master to look the other way. Which guards could be bribed. Which servants were loyal to whom. Which nobles were in debt and desperate. Kaelan listened to everything and forgot nothing. He was building a map in his mind, a vast, complex web of connections and debts and secrets that spanned the entire court. Who owed what to whom? Who hated whom? Who was sleeping with whom? Who had skeletons buried and where? And at the center of that web, like a spider waiting patiently, was Crown Alpha Lucian Drake. Everything connected back to him eventually. Every major decision, every significant alliance, every shift in power. He was the sun around which this entire world orbited, and understanding him meant understanding everything, which made him both Kaelan's greatest obstacle and his most valuable potential asset, if he could figure out how to use that without being destroyed in the process. 6 weeks after the tea party in the Rose Garden, word reached the palace that a delegation was arriving from the frontier territories. Kaelan was in the library when he heard, reading through a boring treatise on agricultural policy that was somehow relevant to understanding trade negotiations. "Did you hear?" Ellen said, bustling in to collect Kaelan for lunch. "There's a delegation coming from the Red Basin Pack, arriving tomorrow, they say, here to negotiate some kind of trade agreement with the Crown." Kaelan's blood turned to ice in his veins. The book slipped from his suddenly numb fingers, hitting the floor with a thud that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet library. "My lady, are you all right?" "Fine," Kaelan managed, bending to retrieve the book before Ellen could see his hands shaking. "Just startled. Who's leading the delegation?" "The new Alpha, I think. Just took power recently. Darius something? Darius Cove?" The name hit like a physical blow. Kaelan stood there in the library staring at nothing, his mind racing so fast he felt dizzy. This was it. The moment he'd been simultaneously dreading and waiting for since the day he woke up in this body. Darius was coming here, to the palace. Would be walking the same halls Kaelan walked, attending the same functions, eating the same food, breathing the same air, would be within arm's reach. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to get as far away as possible before Darius arrived and somehow, impossibly, recognized him despite everything. But another part of him, the part that had survived the frontier, that had clawed its way back from death itself, that had spent weeks building power from nothing, whispered something different. This was an opportunity. Maybe the opportunity. Darius wouldn't recognize him. Couldn't possibly recognize him. He'd left Kaelan Vire bleeding out in the dirt, watched the light fade from his eyes, probably even checked to make sure he was really dead before walking away. In Darius's mind, Kaelan was gone, buried and forgotten, a tool that had outlived its usefulness. He'd never look at Lady Lyra Vale, a delicate Omega noble from an unimportant house, and see his dead beta staring back at him, which meant Kaelan could get close, could watch, and listen, and learn. Could discover what Darius was planning, who his new allies were, what weaknesses he'd developed since taking power. Could plant the seeds of his destruction right under his nose. The thought sent a thrill through him that was equal parts terror and dark anticipation. "My lady?" Ellen's voice was worried now. "You've gone very pale. Should I fetch the physician?" "No," Kaelan said, forcing his voice steady. "No, I'm fine. Just tired. Perhaps I'll skip lunch and rest instead." "Of course, my lady. I'll have a tray sent to your room." Ellen left, and Kaelan sank into the nearest chair, his legs suddenly unwilling to support him. Tomorrow. Less than 24 hours until he came face to face with the man who had murdered him. He needed to prepare. Needed to make sure his mask was perfect, his performance flawless. Because if Darius suspected for even a moment that Lyra was anything other than what she appeared to be, Kaelan didn't let himself finish that thought. The Great Hall had been transformed for the occasion. Banners hung from the vaulted ceiling, representing the various territories and noble houses in attendance. A riot of colors and symbols that was probably supposed to look impressive, but mostly just looked chaotic. Tables laden with food and wine lined the walls, everything excessive and expensive, and designed to show off the kingdom's wealth. Musicians played in the corner, though the music was almost drowned out by the noise of hundreds of people talking at once, the sound echoing off marble and stone until it became a roar. Kaelan stood near the entrance, dressed in a gown of deep green that Ellen had insisted made his eyes look like jewels. His hands were trembling slightly despite his best efforts, so he clasped them together in front of him and forced himself to appear calm. Poised, graceful, utterly harmless. The Frontier delegation entered at precisely 8 o'clock. There were perhaps a dozen of them, all wearing the rough leather and practical clothes of border wolves. They looked deeply uncomfortable in the ornate hall, like predators forced into a gilded cage. Their eyes moved constantly, mapping exits, assessing threats, looking for danger because that's what you did when you came from a place where letting your guard down got you killed. And at their head was Darius. He looked older than Kaelan remembered, harder. There were new lines around his eyes, new scars on his hands visible even from across the room. He wore his authority like armor now, every movement calculated to project strength and confidence and absolute certainty. His dark hair was longer, pulled back in a way that emphasized the sharp angles of his face. His eyes scanned the crowd with obvious disdain, his lip curling slightly at the opulence around him. The Frontier had no patience for this kind of excess, and Darius had always been a true Frontier wolf in that regard. Practical. Ruthless. Willing to do whatever it took to survive, including murder his own beta. Kaelan watched him from across the room, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone nearby could hear it hammering against his ribs. Darius scanned the crowd with those cold, calculating eyes, and then their gazes met. For one terrible, endless moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Kaelan was certain Darius would know, would somehow see through the illusion of silk and soft skin to the soul underneath, would recognize the way Kaelan stood, the way he held himself, something essential that couldn't be hidden by a different body. But Darius's gaze slid past him without the slightest flicker of recognition. Just another pretty Omega among dozens, barely worth noticing, already forgotten. Kaelan exhaled slowly, his lungs burning like he'd been holding his breath underwater. He was safe, for now. Quite the spectacle, isn't it? Kaelan turned to find Lucian standing beside him, 2 glasses of wine in hand. He offered one to Kaelan with a slight smile.
Thank you, Kaelan said, taking it carefully. His hands were still shaking slightly, so he gripped the stem tight to steady them. You're staring at our frontier guests, Lucian observed, his amber eyes missing nothing as usual. Do you know any of them? Have you spent time in the border territories? No, Kaelan lied smoothly. They look so out of place here, like wolves forced into a drawing room.
They are. Lucien's gaze followed his across the room to where Darius stood stiffly, clearly hating every moment of this diplomatic nonsense. The frontier territories have always been difficult to manage. Too independent, too resistant to central authority, too willing to solve their problems with violence instead of negotiation. My father has been trying to bring them properly into the kingdom for decades with very limited success. And now we try diplomacy instead of force. See if trade agreements and marriage alliances work better than military campaigns and punitive expeditions. Lucian didn't sound optimistic. That's their new alpha, Darius Covey. Young, ambitious, recently ascended to power after his father stepped down, or was forced down, depending on who you ask. Kaelan's hand tightened on his wine glass until the stem creaked. What's he like? Ruthless, from what my spies tell me. Lucian took a sip of wine, still watching Darius with the focused attention of a predator evaluating potential prey. Consolidated his power quickly after taking the position, eliminated rivals without hesitation or mercy, made examples of anyone who questioned his authority, smart enough to know he needs allies outside the frontier if he wants to truly secure his position and expand his influence. Why do you ask? Just curious. You're always curious about the right things, Lucian said thoughtfully. It's one of the qualities I find most intriguing about you, Lady Lyra. Before Kaelan could think of a response that wouldn't reveal too much, a commotion at the front of the hall drew their attention. Darius was being introduced to the king. The old monarch sat on a raised platform at the far end of the hall, looking bored and slightly drunk already despite the early hour. His crown sat crooked on his graying hair, and his robes were expensive but rumpled, like he'd slept in them. Alpha Darius Cove of the Red Basin Pack, the herald announced in a voice that carried across the hall. Darius bowed, stiffly, mechanically, like the gesture physically pained him to perform, like kneeling to anyone went against every instinct he had. Your Majesty, thank you for receiving us. Yes, the king waved dismissively, barely looking at him. Welcome to the capital. Very nice. Try not to track mud on the carpets. They're imported. Very expensive. A few courtiers laughed politely at the king's joke. Darius's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping, but he said nothing, just stood there taking the insult because he had no choice, because he needed this alliance more than the king did. My son will handle the negotiations, the king continued, gesturing vaguely at Lucian with his wine glass, sloshing red liquid dangerously close to the rim. I'm far too busy with other important matters of state. By which he meant drinking and entertaining his mistresses and generally being useless, if the court gossip was accurate. Lucian stepped forward smoothly, every inch the competent prince covering for his incompetent father. Alpha Cove, welcome to the capital. I look forward to our discussions over the coming weeks. As do I, Your Highness, Darius said, his voice carefully neutral. They shook hands, two predators sizing each other up, looking for weakness, calculating advantages. Kaelan watched from the shadows, his mind already working through possibilities and plans. This was his chance. Darius would be here for weeks, maybe months, while the negotiations dragged on through layers of bureaucracy and political maneuvering. Plenty of time to observe him, to learn his patterns, his allies, his vulnerabilities, to get close enough to destroy him. But he needed to be smart about it, patient, strategic. One wrong move and everything would collapse. Darius would either recognize him somehow, or Lucian would figure out he was hiding something, or he'd make some mistake that revealed him as more than a simple Omega noble. He couldn't afford any of those outcomes. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 3 days after the delegation's arrival, Kaelan was in the library again. It had become his routine, his safe space, when he heard raised voices from the hallway outside. Absolute insult. Your kind has no place negotiating with civilized people. You should be grateful we even let you inside the palace walls. That was Lord Garrett Sterling, a high-ranking noble with more pride than sense, and a family history of looking down on anyone from the frontier territories. Civilized? Darius's voice was cold, dangerous, barely controlled. Is that what you call poisoning political opponents and buying votes in the council? Is that what you call starving your own people with taxes while you throw parties that cost more than they earn in a year? How dare you? How dare you speak to me that way? I dare because I'm not afraid of you, Darius cut him off. Out on the frontier, men like you don't last a week. You'd be eaten alive by people who actually know how to fight, instead of hiding behind titles and inherited money and generations of political connections you did nothing to earn. You frontier trash, you ignorant, violent. The sound of impact, someone being shoved hard against a wall, the thud echoing down the hallway. Kaelan moved to the doorway, peering out carefully. Darius had Garrett pinned against the marble wall, one hand wrapped around the noble's throat, lifting him slightly so his expensive shoes barely touched the floor. His eyes were blazing with barely restrained fury, all pretense of diplomacy stripped away to reveal the predator underneath. "Call me trash again," Darius said softly, his voice deadly calm now. "Please, I'd love an excuse to show you what frontier justice looks like." "Unhand me," Garrett choked out, his face turning red. "This is assault. The king will hear." "Make me let go," Darius suggested. "Show me the civilized strength you're so proud of." This was escalating badly, spiraling out of control. If Darius actually hurt a high-ranking noble, actually crushed Garrett's throat or broke his neck, the negotiations would collapse immediately. He'd be arrested, maybe executed, definitely thrown out of the palace, and probably out of the kingdom. Which should have been good news for Kaelan, the enemy of his enemy, and all that strategic thinking, but it would also mean losing his chance for revenge. Darius couldn't be allowed to self-destruct before Kaelan had the opportunity to destroy him properly. Before he could talk himself out of it, before he could think through all the ways this could go wrong, Kaelan stepped into the hallway. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying clear authority despite the soft omega pitch, despite the delicate appearance, despite everything. "I don't believe the king would appreciate bloodshed in his palace. It stains the marble terribly, and the servants complain." Both men turned to look at him. Garrett's face was red with rage and humiliation and lack of oxygen. "This doesn't concern you, Lady Lyra. This frontier animal—" "Actually, it does concern me," Kaelan interrupted smoothly, walking closer with careful, graceful steps. "Lord Sterling, perhaps you should go attend to your injured pride somewhere private. I'm sure your dignity could use the privacy. And Alpha Cove—" He met Darius's eyes directly, without fear, without submission. "I suspect Crown Prince Lucian would prefer his negotiating partner not be arrested for assault before the negotiations have even properly begun." For a long moment, Darius didn't move. His hand stayed locked around Garrett's throat, his body coiled like a spring ready to snap. Then, slowly, deliberately, he released him. Garrett stumbled away, gasping and coughing, one hand pressed to his bruised throat. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice ragged. "You'll pay for this, frontier trash, you and your entire barbaric pack." "I look forward to it," Darius replied calmly. Garrett shot them both a look of pure hatred and stormed off, his expensive shoes clicking angrily on the marble floor, leaving Kaelan alone in the hallway with his murderer. The silence stretched between them, heavy with tension. "Thank you," Darius said finally, his voice still rough with barely suppressed violence. "That was diplomatic of you. More diplomatic than I probably deserved. Someone needed to intervene before you did something catastrophically stupid," Kaelan said. "Killing nobles in palace hallways tends to have negative diplomatic consequences." Darius raised an eyebrow, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "You have a sharp tongue for an Omega noble. Most of your kind are too frightened to say what they really think. And you have poor impulse control for an alpha," Kaelan shot back before he could stop himself. To his surprise, Darius laughed, a real laugh, startled out of him. "Fair enough. Very fair. I deserve that." He studied Kaelan with new interest, like seeing him properly for the first time. "I'm Darius Cove, though you probably already knew that." "I know who you are. And you're Lady Lyra Vale, the girl who came back from the dead." Darius tilted his head slightly, curiosity replacing the anger in his expression. "I heard about that. Quite the tale. The servants talk about nothing else. It wasn't as dramatic as people make it sound. Death and resurrection usually are dramatic, regardless of the circumstances. Darius leaned against the wall, suddenly more relaxed, the violence draining out of him like water. You don't seem like the typical court lady. And you don't seem like the typical frontier brute, Kaelan countered. Another laugh. I like you. You're honest, or at least you're willing to pretend to be, which is more than I can say for most people in this place. Everyone else just smiles and lies and schemes while pretending to be civilized. Kaelan's skin crawled at the casual friendliness, but he kept his expression pleasant and mildly amused. This was good. This was exactly what he needed. Getting close to Darius, earning his trust, making him think Lyra was harmless and possibly even an ally. Perhaps we could talk sometime, Darius continued. Properly, I mean. Not just preventing me from committing murder. I find court politics exhausting and dishonest. It would be refreshing to speak with someone who seems willing to say what they actually think instead of what they think I want to hear. If only he knew. If only he had any idea who he was really talking to. I'd like that, Kaelan lied smoothly, the words tasting like poison on his tongue. Tomorrow? Darius suggested. There's a garden on the east side of the palace, quieter than the rest of this marble monstrosity. Less chance of being interrupted by idiots like Sterling. Tomorrow, Kaelan agreed. Darius smiled, the same warm, genuine smile he'd worn 1,000 times when they were young, before the betrayal, before the murder, before everything turned to blood and ashes. And then he walked away, leaving Kaelan standing in the empty hallway, shaking with a mixture of rage and dark, terrible satisfaction. He was in, close enough to touch the man who had killed him, close enough to learn his secrets, his weaknesses, his vulnerabilities, close enough to destroy him from the inside out, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but ruins. The game had truly begun, and this time Kaelan was going to win. The East Garden was smaller than the Rose Garden, less manicured, with wild vines crawling up stone walls that had seen better centuries. Morning light filtered through overgrown trees, casting shadows that moved like living things. Kaelan arrived early, positioning himself near the entrance where he could see anyone approaching. Old habits. Darius showed up exactly on time, dressed in simple frontier clothes that looked out of place against the ornate palace backdrop. No guards, no entourage. Just him. Stupid. Careless. Or maybe he was testing to see if Lyra was dangerous. Lady Lyra, Darius said, his tone almost warm. Thank you for meeting me. You make it sound like I had a choice. You did. You could have sent some polite excuse about feeling ill. He sat on a stone bench, gesturing for Kaelan to join him. But you didn't. Why? Because I need to get close enough to destroy you, Kaelan thought. Curiosity, he said instead. About what? About what kind of man attacks nobles in hallways and then acts surprised when it causes problems. Darius laughed, sharp and bitter. Fair point. Sterling deserved worse than he got, but you're right. Timing matters. Politics. He said the word like it tasted bad. I hate this place. All the smiling and lying and pretending. Give me an honest fight any day. Then why come here at all? Because the frontier is dying. Darius's expression hardened. Resources are scarce. Territory disputes are getting bloodier. We need trade routes, supplies, allies. Pride doesn't fill empty bellies or arm warriors. Kaelan had heard this before. The same justifications Darius's father had used. The same arguments the old Alpha had made when trying to negotiate with the Drake Kingdom years ago. Nothing had changed except the face making the speech. Sounds reasonable, Kaelan said carefully. Does it? Darius studied him. You're different from the others here. Less performative, like you actually think before you speak. Is that so unusual? At this court? Absolutely. Darius leaned back, arms crossed. Most people say whatever they think will benefit them most, or whatever won't get them killed. You just say what you mean. It's refreshing. The irony was suffocating. Tell me about the frontier, Kaelan said, changing direction. What's it really like? Darius's eyes narrowed slightly. Why do you want to know? Because everyone here talks about it like it's some barbaric wasteland full of savages. But you don't seem savage. Violent, yes. Impulsive, definitely. but not savage. There's a difference? I think so. Darius was quiet for a moment, considering. The frontier is hard, unforgiving. It doesn't care about your bloodline or your wealth or your plans. It only cares if you're strong enough to survive. Weak people die. Stupid people die faster. He paused. But it's also honest. When someone wants you dead, they try to kill you. They don't poison your tea and call it an accident. They don't smile at dinner and plot your murder between courses. Kaelan's chest tightened. You sound like you've experienced that. Everyone has. Darius's voice went cold. Betrayal is the frontier's favorite currency. The people you trust most are usually the ones who destroy you. The words hit like a physical blow. Did he feel guilt, regret? Or was this just more convenient philosophy to justify what he'd done? Sounds lonely, Kaelan managed. It is. Darius met his eyes. That's why finding people you can actually trust matters so much. Why losing them hurts worse than any wound. Kaelan wanted to scream, wanted to tear off this mask and show Darius exactly what loss felt like, what betrayal really meant. But he smiled instead, soft, sympathetic. Have you lost someone? He asked quietly. Darius hesitated. Yes, recently. Someone I thought would always be there. What happened? He died. The words were flat, emotionless. Turns out loyalty isn't enough when you're not strong enough to back it up. Kaelan's hands clenched in his lap. Not strong enough. After everything, after all the blood and violence and sacrifice, Darius had reduced Kaelan's entire existence to weakness. I'm sorry, Kaelan lied. Don't be. He served his purpose. Darius stood abruptly. I should go. Council meeting this afternoon. More politics and lying. Of course. Darius started to leave, then turned back. We should do this again. You're easy to talk to, Lady Lyra. I don't get that often. Neither do I, Kaelan said. And that at least was true. After Darius left, Kaelan sat alone in the garden, shaking with rage so intense it felt like fire in his veins. Served his purpose. Like Kaelan had been nothing more than a tool. A weapon to be used and discarded. The worst part was knowing Darius actually believed it. Felt justified. Maybe even slept well at night. Footsteps on gravel made him look up. Lucien stood at the garden entrance, watching him with those sharp amber eyes that missed nothing. Interesting company you're keeping, Lucien said. Kaelan's pulse spiked. I don't know what you mean. Alpha Cove, you've met with him twice now. Lucien walked closer. Why? He asked. I couldn't think of a polite way to refuse. You could have refused anyway. You're not required to entertain every frontier wolf who wanders into the palace. He saved me from an awkward situation with Lord Sterling, Kaelan said. I was returning the favor. Were you? Lucien sat where Darius had been moments ago. Or are you cultivating an alliance? What would I gain from that? I don't know. That's what concerns me. Lucien's expression was unreadable. You're playing a game, Lady Lyra. I just can't figure out what game it is or what you're trying to win. Maybe I'm not playing anything. Everyone plays. The only question is how well. Lucien leaned forward. Let me be direct. Darius Cove is dangerous. He's ambitious, ruthless, and has no loyalty to anyone but himself. Getting close to him is either very brave or very stupid. Which do you think I am? I'm still deciding. Lucien stood. Be careful, Lady Lyra. This court has eaten people with far more experience than you, and if you get caught in the wrong alliance when the knives come out, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern. Darius requested meetings. Kaelan accepted. They talked about nothing important, court gossip, frontier politics, the weather. Darius complained about negotiations. Kaelan listened and offered occasional comments that seemed insightful but revealed nothing. And slowly, carefully, Kaelan gathered information. He learned that Darius had eliminated 3 rival candidates for Alpha within weeks of taking power. 1 in a formal challenge. 2 in accidents that weren't accidents. He learned that Darius was negotiating not just with the crown, but with several noble houses privately, playing them against each other for better terms. He learned that Garrett, the warrior who'd stabbed Kaelan in the back, was here too, part of Darius's delegation, serving as his personal guard. That last piece of information made Kaelan's blood sing with dark anticipation. Both of his murderers. Here, within reach. Through his network of servants, Kaelan also learned something else, something dangerous. There were rumors of a conspiracy, whispers that someone in the palace was feeding information to the frontier territories, details about military deployments, trade route vulnerabilities, internal political divisions, a spy, and suspicion was starting to fall on the frontier delegation. Kaelan was in the library when Lady Margot found him again. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "Somewhere private." She led him to a small room off the main council chambers, checked to make sure they were alone, then locked the door. "There's going to be an investigation," Margot said bluntly. "Information has been leaking to the frontier territories for months. Details that could only come from inside the palace. The king is furious. Lucien is worse." "What does this have to do with me?" "You've been seen with Darius Cove. Repeatedly. Privately." Margot's eyes were hard. "That makes you either complicit or a fool." "I'm neither." "Then prove it. Tell me what you and Cove discuss in your little garden meetings." Kaelan's mind raced. This was dangerous. If Margot thought he was involved in espionage, his entire position here collapsed. But if he gave up too much about his conversations with Darius, she'd want to know why he was pursuing this connection so carefully. "Nothing important," he said. "Darius complains about court politics. I listen. Sometimes I offer perspective. That's all." "That's all?" Margot didn't sound convinced. "Lady Lyra, I'm trying to help you. If you're caught up in this investigation, I'm not involved in any conspiracy. Then distance yourself from Cove. Immediately, before association becomes guilt." After Margot left, Kaelan sat in the empty room, thinking. The investigation was a problem. If they started digging into his background, into Lyra's background, they might find inconsistencies. Things that didn't add up. Questions he couldn't answer. He needed to shift attention elsewhere, and he needed to do it quickly. The opportunity came 3 days later. Kaelan was walking back to his rooms late. Later than usual, after spending hours in the library researching something Ellen had mentioned about Lord Sterling's finances, when he heard voices from a side corridor, low, urgent, trying to be quiet. He pressed himself against the wall, listening. "Can't keep doing this. If we're caught, we won't be caught. I've been careful." Kaelan recognized the second voice. "Garrett, Darius's personal guard. You said that last time, and the time before, but the investigation is looking at the delegation, not us." Garrett's voice was smug. "They suspect Cove himself, perfect cover. What if they search our rooms? They won't find anything. I've been using the Omega servants to carry messages. Nobody pays attention to servants." Kaelan's breath caught. Garrett was the spy, not Darius. Garrett, the man who'd stabbed Kaelan in the back, was also betraying his own alpha, selling information to someone. Kaelan couldn't hear who from this distance. This was perfect. This was exactly what he needed. Kaelan waited until the voices faded, until he was certain they'd left, then made his way quietly back to his rooms. He had leverage now. Information that could destroy Garrett, implicate him in espionage, get him arrested, executed, removed from the board entirely. But using it required careful timing. If he went to Lucien directly, he'd have to explain why he was in that corridor so late, why he'd been listening, how he knew to be there. If he told Darius, Garrett would know someone had overheard. He'd cover his tracks, eliminate evidence, maybe even accuse Kaelan of making false allegations. No. This required subtlety. He needed someone else to discover the evidence, someone whose authority couldn't be questioned. He needed to plant the seeds and let the investigation find what it was already looking for. The next morning, Kaelan sought out Thomas, the kitchen boy who heard everything. "I need a favor," he said quietly, slipping the boy a silver coin, more money than Thomas probably earned in a month. "Anything, my lady. There's a servant named Marie. She works in the guest wing where the frontier delegation is housed. I need you to talk to her casually. Just ask if she's noticed anything strange, if anyone's asked her to carry messages or packages." "That's all?" "That's all. But be subtle. Make it seem like gossip, not an interrogation." Thomas nodded and disappeared. 2 days later, the palace guards arrested Marie. She'd been caught carrying a sealed letter addressed to a merchant in the lower city, a merchant known to have frontier connections. Under questioning, she broke immediately, named Garrett as the one who'd paid her, described a pattern of messages going back months. They arrested Garrett that afternoon. Kaelan watched from a window as guards dragged him away in chains. Garrett was shouting, protesting his innocence, demanding to see Darius. No one listened. Spies didn't get trials at this court. They got interrogations, usually fatal ones. That evening, Darius came to find him. He looked worse than Kaelan had ever seen him, fury and betrayal etched into every line of his face. "Did you know?" Darius demanded without preamble. "About Garrett?" "No, I heard about the arrest like everyone else. He was my most trusted warrior, fought beside me for years, and he was selling us out the entire time." Darius's hands clenched into fists. "I should have seen it, should have known." "How could you have known?" "I should have." Darius's voice was raw. "I trusted him, believed he was loyal, and he betrayed everything." The irony was so thick, Kaelan almost choked on it. "I'm sorry," he said, and part of him actually meant it. Not sympathy for Darius's pain, he deserved far worse, but satisfaction that Darius was finally experiencing what betrayal felt like. "Everyone betrays you eventually," Darius said bitterly. "That's the lesson. Trust is just weakness waiting to be exploited." "Is that what you really believe?" "It's what I know." Darius looked at him, and for a moment, something vulnerable flickered across his face. "You're the only person in this cursed palace who doesn't want something from me, who just talks to me like I'm a person instead of a political asset." If only he knew. "Maybe you're not looking in the right places," Kaelan said carefully. "Maybe there are no right places." Darius stood to leave, then paused. "Thank you for listening, for not judging." After he left, Kaelan sat alone in his room, staring at his hands. One murderer down, one to go. But something felt wrong. Hollow. He'd wanted Garrett to suffer more, wanted him to know why he was dying, wanted to see recognition and fear and regret. Instead, Garrett would die thinking he'd just been unlucky, caught by bad timing and a servant's loose tongue. He wouldn't know that Kaelan Vire had orchestrated his destruction from beyond the grave. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. The palace was on edge after Garrett's arrest. Rumors spread like wildfire. Who else might be involved? How deep did the conspiracy go? Could anyone be trusted? The Frontier delegation was under constant surveillance now. Guards followed them everywhere. Their rooms were searched daily. Negotiations stalled completely while the Crown determined whether Darius himself had been complicit. Kaelan used the chaos to dig deeper. Through Ellen's sister, he learned that Lucien was conducting his own private investigation, separate from the official one. He didn't trust the palace guards to be thorough enough. Through Petra the laundress, he learned that several nobles were using the scandal to push their own agendas, trying to convince the king to expel all Frontier representatives permanently. Through Thomas, he learned that Darius was being pressured to leave, to abandon negotiations and return to the Red Basin before the situation deteriorated further. That couldn't happen. Not yet. Kaelan needed more time. He was in the library, his sanctuary, his thinking place, when Lucien found him. "We need to talk," Lucien said. His voice was tight, controlled, but Kaelan could hear the tension underneath. "Now!" He led Kaelan to a private study, dismissed the guards, locked the door. "I'm going to ask you a question," Lucien said, "and I need you to tell me the truth. Not what you think I want to hear, not what's politically convenient, the actual truth." "All right. What is your relationship with Darius Cove?" Kaelan's heart hammered. "We're acquaintances. We talk sometimes, that's all." "That's all?" Lucian's eyes were hard. "You meet with him regularly, privately. You were one of the first people he sought out after Garrett's arrest. You're either incredibly naive or you're playing a game that could get you killed." "I'm not playing anything. Don't lie to me." Lucien moved closer, crowding into Kaelan's space. "I've been watching you since you arrived. Every move, every conversation, every carefully calculated step. You're not some innocent noble girl caught up in politics she doesn't understand. You're smart, strategic, dangerous in your own way."
You're imagining things. Am I? Lucian grabbed his wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to make his point. Your pulse is racing. You're scared. Of what? What are you hiding? Everything, Kaelan thought. My identity. My past. My purpose. The fact that I'm using you all like game pieces while plotting murder and revenge. Nothing, he said aloud. I'm hiding nothing. Lucian stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for truth. Then he released him, stepped back. I don't believe you, he said quietly, but I can't prove otherwise, not yet. He moved toward the door, then paused. Be very careful, Lady Lyra. The next few days will be dangerous. Accusations will fly. People will look for scapegoats. If you're caught in the crossfire, I can handle myself. Can you? Lucian's expression was unreadable. I hope so. Because I'd hate to see you destroyed before I figure out what you're really after. He left. Kaelan stood alone in the study, shaking. Lucien was getting too close, asking the right questions, pushing too hard. He needed to redirect attention, create a bigger crisis. Something that would consume everyone's focus and energy, something explosive. The idea came to him slowly, forming like ice in his mind. It was risky, potentially catastrophic, but it would work. It had to work. That night, Kaelan went to see Darius. He found him in his guest quarters, alone, staring at maps spread across a table. Planning, calculating, trying to salvage negotiations that were already dead. Lady Lyra! Darius looked up, surprised. What are you doing here? It's late. If anyone sees... I needed to warn you, Kaelan said urgently. There's going to be another arrest, tomorrow. They think you were involved with Garrett's conspiracy. Darius went very still. How do you know this? I overheard servants talking. Lucien ordered it personally. He thinks you knew what Garrett was doing, that you were using the negotiations as cover. That's insane. I had no idea, son. It doesn't matter what's true. It matters what they can make people believe. Kaelan moved closer. You need to leave tonight, before they arrest you. Running makes me look guilty. Staying gets you killed. Kaelan let fear bleed into his voice. Not hard, since this was genuinely dangerous. They don't want a trial. They want a confession, and they'll torture you until they get one. Darius's jaw clenched. If I leave, the treaty fails. My pack loses everything. If you die, your pack loses their alpha. Silence. There's another option, Kaelan said carefully. The Crown has evidence against you. Fabricated evidence, but evidence nonetheless. Letters supposedly in your handwriting, payments to Garrett. If that evidence disappeared, how? I know where Lucien keeps his private documents. I could get access. Why would you risk that for me? Because I need you alive long enough to destroy you properly, Kaelan thought. Because you're the only person in this palace who treats me like a person, he said aloud. Not a hostage, not a pawn, just someone worth talking to. Darius studied him for a long moment. If you're lying, he said slowly, if this is some kind of trap, it's not. Then tell me, where does Lucien keep these documents? Kaelan described the location, information he'd gathered from Ellen's sister, verified through Thomas, confirmed through Petra. There's a guard rotation at midnight, he continued, 5-minute gap when the corridor is empty. That's your window. And you? I'll create a distraction. Make sure attention is elsewhere. Darius grabbed his shoulder suddenly. If this works, if you're telling the truth, I owe you everything. Just remember that, Kaelan said. They separated, Darius to prepare, Kaelan to set his trap. Because the truth was simpler and more brutal than Darius suspected. There was no fabricated evidence. No private documents proving Darius's guilt, but there would be evidence of Darius breaking into Lucien's private study, trying to steal sensitive documents, caught in the act by guards who would be arriving exactly on schedule, not because of any investigation, but because Kaelan had sent them. He'd sent a message earlier, anonymous, written in careful script, to the captain of the guard, informing him that the Frontier Alpha planned to break into the Crown Prince's study at midnight, suggesting he station men nearby to catch the traitor in the act. The captain had believed it. Why wouldn't he? With all the paranoia and suspicion floating around, it seemed perfectly plausible.
Midnight approached. Kaelan positioned himself near the study, hidden in an alcove, watching. Darius appeared right on time, moving quietly through the empty corridor. He reached the study door, tested the handle. Locked, as expected. He pulled out a thin piece of metal, lock-picking tools probably learned on the frontier, and began working the mechanism. Kaelan counted seconds in his head. 10, 20, 30. The lock clicked open. Darius pushed the door, and that's when the guards appeared. 6 of them, armed, moving fast. "Stop! In the name of the crown!" Darius spun, eyes wide, hand reaching for a weapon he wasn't carrying. They'd confiscated all weapons from the delegation after Garrett's arrest. "This isn't... I didn't... You're under arrest for espionage and treason." They grabbed him, forced him to his knees, locked iron manacles around his wrists. Darius's eyes swept the corridor desperately, searching. They found Kaelan in the alcove. Understanding dawned on his face. Betrayal, shock, rage. "You," he breathed. "You set me up." Kaelan stepped out of the shadows, looked Darius directly in the eyes, and smiled. "Loyalty isn't enough when you're not strong enough to back it up," he said softly, throwing Darius's own words back at him. "Remember saying that?" Darius's face went white. "Who are you?" "Someone you shouldn't have discarded like trash." The guards dragged him away, still shouting, demanding answers that would never come. Kaelan stood alone in the corridor, breathing hard, pulse racing. He'd done it. Destroyed Darius completely. Not with violence, not with honest combat, with lies and manipulation and betrayal, the very tools Darius had used against him. Footsteps behind him made him turn. Lucian stood there, watching him with an expression Kaelan couldn't read. "That was you," Lucian said quietly. "You set this up, the tip to the guards, the instructions to Cove, all of it." Kaelan's blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Lucian walked closer. "I've been having you followed, watched. Every conversation recorded, every meeting noted. I know you've been playing both sides. I just couldn't figure out why." His eyes narrowed. "Until now." Kaelan's mind raced. If Lucian knew, if he could prove anything. "This was personal," Lucian continued. "Whatever happened between you and Darius Cove, it wasn't about politics or allegiance or the crown. It was revenge." Silence stretched between them. "Who are you really?" Lucian asked. "And don't say Lyra Vale. That girl died and someone else woke up in her body. Someone dangerous. Someone with secrets worth killing for." Kaelan met his eyes, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, he told a version of the truth. "I'm someone Darius Cove murdered," he said quietly. "Someone who came back to make him pay." Lucian stared at him. Then, impossibly, he laughed. "I knew it," he said. "I knew you were hiding something impossible. I just never imagined—" He shook his head. "This changes everything. Are you going to arrest me? For what? Destroying a traitor? Exposing a conspiracy?" Lucian's smile was sharp. "You just did me a favor, Lady Lyra, or whatever your name really is. The Frontier delegation is finished. Darius will be executed for treason, and I get credit for catching him." "Then why tell me you know?" "Because I want to make a deal." Lucian moved closer. "You're intelligent, ruthless, and clearly capable of things most people can't even imagine. I could use someone like you, an advisor, an asset, someone who operates in shadows while I work in the light. You want me to spy for you. I want you to use those considerable talents in service of the crown instead of just personal vengeance. And if I refuse, then I'll be forced to investigate how exactly a dead girl came back to life in a different body, how she infiltrated the palace, what other secrets she's hiding." Lucian's expression hardened. "I'm offering you power, Lady Lyra, real power, protection, a purpose beyond revenge. Don't be stupid enough to refuse." Kaelan stood there, trapped. He'd destroyed Darius, accomplished his primary goal, but in doing so, he'd revealed himself to the one person in this palace who might actually be dangerous enough to destroy him. "I'll need time to think," he said carefully. "You have until tomorrow." Lucian turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. The person you used to be, the one Darius killed. Were you lovers? Brothers? In everything but blood?" "That makes more sense." Lucian looked back at him. Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from family. I understand that better than you know. He walked away, leaving Kaelan alone in the corridor with the weight of everything crashing down. He'd won, but the victory tasted like ashes, and the game, he was only now beginning to realize, was far from over. Kaelan didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window in his room, watching the sky fade from black to gray to pale morning light, turning Lucian's offer over in his mind like a weapon he didn't know how to use. Work for the Crown Prince. Become his spy, his shadow operative, his knife in the dark. It should have been an easy decision. He'd already proven he was good at manipulation, at gathering secrets, at destroying people from the inside out. Why not get paid for it? Why not have the protection of the most powerful man in the kingdom? But something about it felt wrong. Felt like trading one master for another, one cage for another, when what he'd wanted since waking up in this body was freedom, the power to control his own fate. Ellen knocked softly at dawn with breakfast and worried eyes. "My lady, you look terrible. Did you sleep at all?" "Not much." "Everyone's talking about Alpha Cove's arrest. They say he tried to steal military secrets, that he'll be executed within the week." Ellen set down the tray, her hands shaking slightly. They say you were seen near the Crown Prince's study last night." Kaelan's attention sharpened. "Who's saying that?" "Just people. Servants talk." Ellen wouldn't meet his eyes. "My lady, whatever you're involved in, please be careful. The palace isn't safe right now. They're looking for conspirators everywhere." After Ellen left, Kaelan forced himself to eat, to think clearly despite the exhaustion dragging at his bones. Lucien had given him until today to decide. But the truth was, he didn't really have a choice. Refusing the Crown Prince's offer was the same as confessing guilt, and Lucien had enough suspicion now to make Kaelan's life very difficult if he wanted to. The smart play was to accept. To use Lucien's protection while figuring out his next move. But first, he needed to see Darius one last time. Needed to look him in the eyes and confirm that the bastard finally understood what he'd done, what he'd destroyed, what it felt like to be betrayed by someone you trusted. The palace dungeons were carved into bedrock beneath the east wing, accessible only through a guarded stairwell that descended into darkness and cold stone. Kaelan had never been down here. Laravel would have had no reason to visit prisoners, but his network of servants had described the layout in detail. He approached the guards at the entrance, keeping his posture meek and unthreatening. "I need to see the prisoner Darius Cove," he said quietly. The older guard frowned. "That's not permitted, my lady. Crown Prince's orders. No visitors." "I have information for the Crown Prince, about the prisoner, things he said to me that might be relevant to the investigation." That was technically true. Darius had said plenty to Lady Lyra over the past weeks, none of it treasonous, but the guards didn't need to know that. The guards exchanged glances. "The Crown Prince is in council meetings all morning," the younger one said. "Won't be available for hours." "Then I'll wait with the prisoner until he's free. I'm sure His Highness would be very interested in what I have to say. Unless you'd like to explain to him why you turned away a potential witness?" More hesitation. Then the older guard sighed. "Fine. But 15 minutes, no more. And we're locking the door behind you." They led him down worn stone steps that spiraled deeper into the earth, the temperature dropping with each level until Kaelan could see his breath misting in the torchlight. The walls were damp, streaked with moisture and things he didn't want to identify. The smell was worse. Unwashed bodies, old blood, despair made manifest. Darius's cell was at the end of a long corridor, separated from the other prisoners by iron bars and heavy silence. He sat on a stone bench, wrists and ankles chained, looking worse than Kaelan had ever seen him. Bruised, exhausted, beaten down by more than just physical captivity. He looked up when the guards opened the cell door and something flickered across his face when he saw who it was. Rage. Recognition. Something almost like relief. "Lady Lyra," he said, his voice hoarse. "Come to gloat?" "Something like that," Kaelan said. The guards locked the door behind him with a heavy clang, then retreated to the end of the corridor, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give the illusion of privacy. Darius stood slowly, chains rattling. "I've been trying to figure it out all night, who you really are, how I know you, because I do know you. I can feel it. Can you?
Your voice, the way you move, something about your eyes. Darius moved closer, studying him intently.
We've met before. Not as Lady Lyra, as someone else. Very perceptive. Tell me. Before they execute me, at least give me that. Who are you? Kaelan had imagined this moment 1,000 times, pictured himself revealing the truth dramatically, watching Darius's face crumble as he realized exactly who had destroyed him. But standing here in this cold cell, looking at his former friend's haunted eyes, the satisfaction he'd expected didn't come. Instead, he just felt tired. You said loyalty wasn't enough when you're not strong enough to back it up, Kaelan said quietly. Remember? You said that about someone you killed, someone who served his purpose. Darius went very still. Kaelan, there it is. That's impossible. You're dead. I watched you die. I checked your body myself, and apparently didn't do a thorough enough job. Kaelan's smile was bitter. Death isn't as permanent as you thought. Or maybe the universe just really wanted me to have a second chance at destroying you. Darius staggered backward like he'd been hit, sat down hard on the stone bench, stared at Kaelan with something approaching horror. This is insane. You can't be... How? Does it matter? I'm here, you're there, and everything you built is about to collapse because you taught me exactly how to tear it all down. Kaelan crouched so they were eye level. You want to know the best part? You trusted me. Lady Lyra, the harmless Omega Noble. You told me things, confided in me, treated me like an ally. You manipulated me. I learned from the best. Kaelan's voice went cold. You murdered me, Darius, stabbed me in the back during a sacred ceremony in front of the entire pack, left me to bleed out like I was nothing. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? I did what I had to do. But Darius's voice lacked conviction now, the certainty he'd worn like armor cracking. You were too strong, too respected. People followed you instead of me. An alpha can't have someone like that standing next to him. So you killed me rather than trust me, rather than believe I actually meant it when I swore loyalty. Kaelan stood. And now you're going to die the same way. Betrayed by someone you thought you could trust. Destroyed by your own paranoia and ambition. If you wanted revenge, why not just kill me yourself? Why this elaborate performance? Because killing you would have been too easy, too quick. I wanted you to feel what I felt. The betrayal, the helplessness, the realization that everything you believed about yourself was a lie. Darius was quiet for a long moment, chains rattling softly as his hands trembled. I'm sorry, he said finally. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. Sorry your plan didn't work out. But you're not sorry you killed me. You'd do it again if you thought it would save you. Maybe. Darius looked up at him, and for a moment Kaelan saw the boy he'd grown up with, the friend he'd loved like a brother. But for what it's worth, I did care about you, before. When we were young. That part was real. It doesn't matter now. No, Darius agreed. I suppose it doesn't. Kaelan turned to leave, then paused. They're going to execute you tomorrow. Public hanging in the main square. The king wants to make an example. Show the frontier territories what happens to traitors. Will you watch? Probably. I want to make sure you're actually dead this time. Fair enough. Darius's laugh was hollow. You win, Kaelan. You survived. You destroyed me. You proved you were stronger. That must feel good. It should, Kaelan said quietly. But it doesn't. It just feels empty. He called for the guards, who unlocked the door and led him back up to the surface, back to light and air and the world of the living. Behind him, Darius sat alone in his cell, waiting for an execution that would come with the sunrise, and Kaelan felt nothing at all. When he emerged from the dungeons, Lucien was waiting. I heard you visited our prisoner, the Crown Prince said. That's unexpected. What did you discuss? Closure, Kaelan said simply. Did you get it? I'm not sure that's possible. Lucien studied him for a moment, then gestured down the corridor. Walk with me. We have things to discuss. They walked through the palace gardens, past ornamental fountains and carefully cultivated flower beds, until they reached a secluded gazebo overlooking the city below. I've been thinking about your offer,
Kaelan said before Lucian could speak. And I'll accept. On certain conditions. You're negotiating? Lucian sounded more amused than offended. Bold. What conditions? First, I want protection. Real protection. If anyone starts digging into Lyravale's background, I need you to make it stop. Agreed. That benefits me as much as you. I don't want my new asset exposed and destroyed by some overzealous investigator. Second, I choose my assignments. I won't work against my own interest or commit atrocities just because you order it. That one's more complicated, Lucian said carefully. I need to know you'll follow orders when it matters. You'll have my loyalty, but not my blind obedience. Take it or leave it. Lucien was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he smiled. All right, I can work with that. You're more useful thinking for yourself anyway. Mindless servants are boring. Third, I want access to information. Court records, intelligence reports, financial documents. If I'm going to be effective, I need to know what's really happening. Within reason. Some things are classified even from my most trusted people. Fair enough, Kaelan paused. And one more thing. When this arrangement ends, when I've served your purposes, or you've served mine, we part ways cleanly. No hunting me down, no using what you know against me. That sounds like you're planning to betray me eventually. I'm planning for every possibility, same as you are. Lucian laughed, genuine, surprised laughter. You're remarkable, you know that. Most people beg for my favor. You're negotiating like we're equals. Aren't we? You need me as much as I need you. Maybe, Lucian extended his hand. Do we have an agreement? Kaelan shook it. Lucien's grip was firm, warm, the handshake of someone sealing a business arrangement rather than offering friendship. Welcome to the real game, Lady Lyra, Lucian said. Or should I call you something else in private? Lyra is fine. That person I used to be is dead. Actually dead, not just legally. Fair enough. Lyra it is. Lucien released his hand. Your first assignment starts tonight. There's a council meeting where several nobles plan to oppose my father's new trade legislation. I need to know who's leading the opposition, what leverage they're using, and what it would take to flip them. That's politics, not espionage. Everything is espionage if you look at it correctly. Besides, you're good at reading people, at finding weaknesses. Consider this a test. Kaelan spent the rest of the day preparing. He read through the proposed legislation, dense, boring stuff about tariff rates and merchant guilds, and identified which noble houses would benefit and which would lose money. He reviewed his notes on the various council members, the information his servant network had gathered about their personal lives, their debts, their secrets. By the time the council meeting began that evening, he knew exactly what he needed to do. The meeting was held in a large chamber near the throne room, with the king presiding from an elevated seat while his advisors argued below. Kaelan wasn't officially permitted to attend. It was a closed session for council members only, but Lucien had arranged for him to observe from a concealed balcony above, hidden behind decorative screens where he could see and hear everything without being seen. The debate started civilly enough. The king's chief treasurer explained the benefits of the new trade legislation, how it would increase crown revenue, strengthen relationships with merchant guilds, open new markets in the eastern provinces. Then Lord Marcus Vane stood up. Your Majesty, with all due respect, this legislation is catastrophic for the northern territories. The new tariff structure would bankrupt half the noble houses in the region. We cannot support it. Several other nobles nodded agreement. A bloc, Kaelan realized. Organized opposition, not random complaints. The crown's finances must take priority, the treasurer argued. Individual hardship is regrettable, but... Individual hardship? Lady Helena Morse, yes, the same one whose affair had scandalized the court weeks ago, cut him off. Lord Vane is being diplomatic. Let me be clear. This legislation is a disaster. It redistributes wealth from the northern houses to the crown's coffers while enriching southern merchants who are already drowning in gold. We will not support it. More nods. More voices joining the opposition. Kaelan watched carefully, noting who spoke and who stayed silent, who looked uncomfortable with the confrontation and who seemed to relish it. And he noticed something interesting. Lord Vane kept glancing at Lady Morse for approval before speaking, like he was following her lead rather than acting independently. She was the real power here. The
The others were just following along. After the meeting ended in deadlock, the legislation tabled for further discussion, Kaelan made his way back to Lucien's private study and found the crown prince waiting. "Well?" Lucien asked. "What did you learn?" "Lady Morse is leading the opposition, not Lord Vane. He's just the public face. She's the one who organized the block and convinced the others to hold firm." "Interesting. Why her?" "Because she's angry. Her scandal with the guard destroyed her reputation. Her husband divorced her publicly. She lost her position at court, her social standing, everything. Now she's rebuilding power the only way available, through political opposition, making herself valuable to the northern houses by organizing their resistance." "And how do we break her?" Kaelan had thought about this carefully. "We don't. We offer her something better. A way back into court favor, a rehabilitation of her reputation, in exchange for her cooperation on the legislation. She'd never accept. She hates the crown for not protecting her during the scandal. She hates being powerless more. Give her a pathway back to relevance. Maybe a position as advisor on northern affairs, something that sounds important, and she'll take it. The other nobles in her block are followers, not leaders. Without her, they'll collapse." Lucien considered this. "That's actually brilliant. Turning an enemy into an asset instead of destroying her. I like it. There's one problem. She won't trust an offer coming directly from you. She'll assume it's a trap." "Then how do we approach her?" "Let me do it. Lady Lyra, the harmless Omega who has no official position or power. I can present it as advice from a sympathetic friend rather than a command from the crown." Lucien smiled. "You really are good at this. Fine, make the approach, but be careful. If she suspects you're working for me, she'll shut down completely." The next day, Kaelan arranged to encounter Lady Morse accidentally in the palace gardens. Helena was walking alone, which was telling in itself. Her friends had abandoned her after the scandal, leaving her isolated and vulnerable. "Lady Morse," Kaelan said, approaching carefully. "I hope I'm not intruding." Helena looked up, her expression wary. "Lady Lyra, what do you want?" "Just to walk, and perhaps to talk, if you're willing." "About what?" "About second chances, and how sometimes the people who've been destroyed have the most to gain from rebuilding differently." Helena's eyes narrowed. "That sounds like the beginning of a political pitch." "Maybe. Or maybe it's just one outsider recognizing another." Kaelan gestured to a nearby bench. "I know what it's like to be dismissed, to have people look at you like you're nothing, to fight for every scrap of respect." "Do you?" Helena's voice was sharp. "You're young, beautiful, unmarried, and under the crown's protection. What could you possibly know about being destroyed?" "More than you think. I died once, came back, and had to rebuild from absolute nothing." That was true enough, even if Helena didn't understand the full context. "The difference between us is that I didn't have a choice about starting over. You do." Helena sat down, her posture defensive but listening. "What are you really saying?" "I'm saying the northern bloc you organized is impressive, smart, but it's also a dead end. Even if you block this legislation, you don't gain anything except temporary satisfaction. The crown will just propose something else, and you'll be back to fighting the same battle. So I should surrender. I'm saying you should negotiate from a position of strength while you still have it. The crown needs this legislation to pass. You have the power to make that happen. Use that leverage to get something you actually want." "Like what?" "Like a formal position. Advisor on northern affairs with real authority and a seat at council meetings, recognition, legitimacy. A pathway back to relevance that doesn't require you to grovel or apologize." Helena stared at her. "The crown would never offer that. Not to me. They would if you made it worth their while. Give them the votes they need. In exchange, you get protection, position, and power." Kaelan leaned closer. "You're smart enough to know you can't win by opposing them forever, but you can win by making yourself indispensable." "And why are you telling me this? What do you gain?" Honestly, I like watching powerful people underestimate women and then get proven wrong. You organize that block in weeks. Imagine what you could do with actual resources." Helena was quiet for a long time, thinking. "If I were to consider this," she said carefully, "how would it work? I can't just approach the crown directly. That looks weak. You don't approach them. You let me carry the message. As a neutral party, I suggest they consider bringing you in as an advisor. They think it's my idea. You accept reluctantly, making it clear you're doing them a favor. Everyone saves face. And in return, I deliver the votes. Exactly. Helena studied her with sharp, calculating eyes.
You're more dangerous than you look, Lady Lyra. I get that a lot. Fine. Make your proposal. But if this is a trap, if they try to humiliate me, it's not a trap. It's an opportunity for both of us. 3 days later, the council voted on the trade legislation again. This time, with Lady Morse's public support and the Northern Bloc falling in line behind her, it passed overwhelmingly. The king was pleased. Lucienne was impressed, and Helena Morse was appointed as special advisor on Northern affairs, complete with an office and a seat at minor council meetings. Lucienne summoned Kaelan to his study that evening.
That was masterfully done, he said. You turned a political enemy into an asset without bloodshed or threats. Just pure strategy. She wanted a way back. I gave her one. Simple. Nothing about you is simple, Lyra. Lucian poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to Kaelan. I'm starting to think keeping you as an ally was the best decision I've made in months. Don't get too comfortable. I'm expensive. Clearly, Lucian raised his glass, to new partnerships and to second chances. They drank. And for the first time since waking up in this body, since plotting revenge and murder and destruction, Kaelan felt something shift inside him. He'd spent weeks focused entirely on destroying Darius, on revenge, on proving he was strong enough to survive. But maybe there was more to this new life than just settling old scores. Maybe there was actual power to be built, influence to be gained, a future that looked like something other than blood and ashes. The thought should have felt like betrayal, like abandoning who he used to be. Instead, it felt like possibility. The execution was held the next morning in the main square, with half the city turning out to watch. Kaelan stood in the crowd, anonymous in a simple cloak, and watched as they brought Darius out in chains. He looked small on the scaffold, diminished. Just a man about to die, stripped of titles and authority and everything that had made him powerful. The executioner read the charges. Treason, espionage, conspiracy against the crown. Darius didn't fight, didn't protest, just stood there with his head held high, accepting his fate with the same cold pragmatism he'd always lived by. Their eyes met across the crowd one final time. Darius nodded slightly. Acknowledgement, maybe even respect. Then the floor dropped. The ropes snapped tight. And Darius Covey, alpha of the Red Basin Pack, was dead. The crowd cheered. Justice served. Traitor punished. Kaelan felt nothing. Just emptiness where rage used to be. Hollowness where purpose had lived. He turned and walked away before the body stopped swinging. That evening, he found Lucian in the war room, studying maps and troop deployments. It's done, Kaelan said quietly. I know, I was there. Lucian looked up. How do you feel? I don't know. I thought I'd feel satisfied, victorious, something, but I just feel empty. That's normal. Revenge rarely delivers what it promises. Lucian set down his papers. The question is, what do you do now? You've accomplished what you came here for. You could leave, disappear, start over somewhere new. I could, Kaelan agreed, but you're not going to. No, I don't think I am. Why not? Kaelan was quiet for a moment, thinking. Because for the first time in my life, both lives, I have actual power, not borrowed authority. Not strength dependent on someone else's favor. Real power that I built myself. And I'm not ready to give that up. Lucienne smiled. Good, because I have plans for you. Big plans. The frontier territories are in chaos now without leadership. Several packs are already fighting over succession. The crown needs someone who understands that world, someone who can negotiate, manipulate, and if necessary, destroy. You want me to go back there? Eventually, when the time is right. For now, I want you here, learning, building your network, becoming the kind of asset kings go to war to protect. That sounds dangerous. Everything worth doing is dangerous. Lucian extended his hand. What do you say, Lyra? Ready to stop playing small and start building an empire? Kaelan looked at the offered hand, thought about Darius hanging from a rope.
Thought about Kaelan Vire bleeding out under a cold moon. Thought about Lyra Vale dying from poison and coming back as something else entirely. All those people were dead now, gone. But this person, whoever she was becoming, was very much alive and hungry for more. She took Lucien's hand and shook it firmly. "Let's build something worth remembering," she said. Outside, the moon rose over the palace, full and bright and watching. But for the first time, Kaelan didn't see it as a reminder of death and betrayal. She saw it as a witness to her rebirth, and to the future she was going to carve out of this world, one calculated move at a time. 6 months passed like water through cupped hands. Kaelan, she thought of herself fully as Lyra now, the old name feeling like something from another life entirely, had become what Lucien needed her to be. His shadow, his strategist, the person who solved problems that couldn't be solved with soldiers or gold. She'd negotiated 3 trade disputes, turned 2 potential enemies into allies, and quietly eliminated a conspiracy involving corrupt tax collectors who'd been skimming crown revenue for years. Not through violence, she'd learned better than that, but through careful exposure of evidence to people who cared about such things. Her network of servants had grown into something formidable. Information flowed to her constantly now. Who was meeting with whom? Which nobles were in debt? Which merchants were smuggling contraband? Which guards could be bribed? And which were genuinely loyal? She knew more about what happened in the palace than the king himself did, and people were starting to notice. It was Lady Margot who approached her first, cornering Lyra in the library one afternoon with an expression that was equal parts suspicious and impressed. "You've become quite influential," Margot said without preamble. 6 months ago you were a nobody, a hostage from a minor house with no connections. Now you're advising the crown prince on matters of state. That's remarkable." "I've been useful," Lyra said carefully. "Nothing more. Usefulness is its own form of power." Margot sat down across from her. "I want to know what you're planning, what your endgame is." "I don't have an endgame. I'm just surviving. Don't insult my intelligence." Margot's eyes were sharp. "Nobody accumulates this much influence without a goal. So what is it? Power? Wealth? Revenge against someone?" Lyra met her gaze steadily. "Maybe I just got tired of being powerless. Maybe I decided to be the kind of person who shapes events instead of being shaped by them." "That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me." Margot leaned back. "All right, I can respect that. But understand, the higher you climb, the harder the fall. And at this court, everyone eventually falls. Then I'll make sure I'm standing on solid ground when it happens." Margot smiled slightly. "I believe you might actually manage it. Just remember, when you need allies, and you will need them, I'm someone worth knowing." She left, and Lyra sat alone with her books, thinking. Margot was right. She'd climbed fast. Too fast, maybe. People were starting to ask questions she couldn't answer, about her background, about where she'd learned to navigate politics so skillfully, about who Lady Lyra Vale really was. The lies were getting harder to maintain. The crisis came 3 weeks later from a direction Lyra hadn't anticipated. A delegation arrived from House Vale, her supposed family. Her father, Baron Thomas Vale, along with her 2 older brothers, Richard and Edmund. They'd come to visit their sister, to see how she was faring at court, to discuss family matters. Lyra's blood turned cold when she heard. She'd never met these people, didn't know them beyond what she'd read in letters and court records, had no idea what the real Lyra's relationship with them had been like. This could destroy everything. Ellen helped her dress for the meeting, chattering nervously about how excited she must be to see her family again after so long. "I'm sure they've missed you terribly, my lady. Family is so important." "Yes," Lyra managed, "so important." The meeting was arranged in a private sitting room overlooking the gardens. Lucien had offered to attend. He knew this could be dangerous, but Lyra had refused. Having the crown prince present would only make the deception more obvious. She walked into the room alone and found 3 men waiting. Baron Thomas Vale was in his 50s, gray-haired and stern-looking, with the weathered face of someone who worked his own lands rather than just collecting rents. Her brothers were younger, Richard perhaps 30, Edmund 25, both tall and broad-shouldered with the kind of practical strength that came from actual labor. They looked like good men, honest men. Men who deserved better than a stranger wearing their sister's face. "Father," Lyra said, forcing herself to step forward. Richard, Edmund, it's been so long. Baron Vale's expression was unreadable. Lyra, you look well. Different somehow, but well. The poison changed things. The physician said it might affect memory, personality. That's what we heard. Richard was studying her with sharp eyes that missed nothing. You don't remember much from before? Not as much as I'd like. The lie tasted bitter.
They sat. Servants brought tea. And for the first hour, the conversation was carefully neutral. Talk about the estate, about weather and harvests and local politics. Nothing personal. Nothing that would require Lyra to know things she couldn't possibly know. But then Edmund leaned forward. Do you remember the oak tree? He asked quietly. The one by the creek where we used to play when we were children? Lyra's mind raced. Was this a test? A genuine question? A trap? I'm sorry, she said carefully. I don't. The poison affected so much. Whole years are just gone. Edmund's face fell. It's really that bad? I'm afraid so. Baron Vale was quiet for a long moment, studying her. Then he spoke, his voice heavy with something Lyra couldn't quite identify. You're not her, are you? The room went dead silent. Lyra's pulse hammered. I don't know what you mean. My daughter, the real Lyra. The Baron's eyes were sad, knowing. You're not her. I can see it. The way you hold yourself, the way you speak. Even the way you breathe is different. Richard and Edmund looked shocked, but the Baron raised a hand to silence them. I need to know, he continued, what happened to my daughter, the real one. Is she truly dead? Lyra could have lied, should have lied, but looking at this man's grief-stricken face, she found she couldn't. Yes, she said quietly. She died. The poison killed her. I'm something else. Someone else. I don't expect you to understand or believe it, but that's the truth. And who are you? Someone who needed a second chance. Someone who woke up in her body and had to learn to survive all over again. The Baron was quiet for a long time. His sons looked between him and Lyra, confused and angry. This is insane, Richard said. Father, we should report this to the crown. This is complicated, the Baron interrupted. Be quiet and let me think. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the gardens. My daughter was gentle, he said finally. Kind, obedient. She did everything we asked of her, including coming here to be a hostage when I was too much of a coward to refuse the king's demand. His voice cracked slightly. She didn't deserve what happened to her, and I've carried that guilt every day since. Father, Edmund started, but the person sitting in this room now, the Baron turned back to face Lyra. You're not gentle, not obedient. You're strong, dangerous even. I can see it in your eyes. You've built power here that my daughter never could have managed. I've done what I had to do to survive. Yes, and in doing so, you've probably accomplished more in 6 months than Lyra could have in 6 years. The Baron returned to his seat. So, here's my question. Are you a threat to my family, to House Vale? Lyra considered lying, but something about this man demanded honesty. No, I have no interest in your lands or your title. I need the name and the protection it provides. But beyond that, your family business is your own. And if we expose you, tell the crown what you are, then we all lose. I lose my position and probably my life. You lose whatever small influence House Vale has at court. The crown loses a valuable asset. Nobody wins. Except we'd have the truth. Would you? Lyra leaned forward. What truth exactly? That your daughter died and something impossible happened? Who would believe that? They'd say you were mad or lying. At best, they'd think you were trying to escape responsibility for sending her here. The Baron studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed. You're right. Damn you, but you're right. He looked at his sons. We're going to let this go. All of it. Father, we can't just... Richard protested. We can and we will. The Baron's voice was firm. Whoever this person is, they're doing more good for House Vale than the real Lyra ever could have. They've elevated our family's position, made our name known at court, given us connections we never had before. I won't destroy that out of sentiment. That's cold, Edmund said. That's practical. The Baron stood. We came here because we loved our daughter. We're leaving because we love our family. Sometimes those aren't the same thing. He walked to the door, his sons following reluctantly, but he paused at the threshold and looked back. Take care of our name, he said quietly. Whatever else you are, you wear it now. Don't shame it. I won't, Lyra promised. After they left, she sat alone in the empty room, shaking. She'd been prepared for exposure, for accusations, for destruction. Instead, she'd found understanding, acceptance of a sort, permission to keep being whoever she'd become. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like one more lie she'd have to carry. That night, she told Lucien everything. They were in his private study, the door locked, guards dismissed. Just the two of them, and the weight of secrets too dangerous to share with anyone else. They know, she said. Baron Vale and his sons. They know I'm not really Lyra. Lucien went very still. And? And they're going to keep quiet, as long as I don't damage House Vale's interests. That's unexpected. Lucien poured himself a drink, drained it in one swallow. Also dangerous, they have leverage over you now. They had leverage before. At least now we understand each other. Do we? Lucien refilled his glass. Because I'm starting to think I don't understand you at all, Lyra, or whoever you really are. Does it matter? Yes, because I need to know what drives you, what you want. What would make you betray me if the price was right? I won't betray you. Everyone betrays everyone eventually. Lucien's voice was bitter. That's the first rule of survival. The only question is when and why. Lyra thought about Darius, about trust and loyalty and how easily both could be destroyed. Not everyone, she said quietly. Some of us actually mean it when we make promises. Then promise me something. Lucien set down his glass. Promise that whatever you're building, whatever endgame you have planned, it doesn't end with my destruction. I promise. Just like that? Just like that. Lyra met his eyes. You gave me a chance when I had nothing, helped me build power when I was powerless. I don't forget things like that. Lucien studied her for a long moment, searching for lies. All right, he said finally. I believe you. Or at least I want to believe you. That's probably stupid, but I'm tired of being suspicious of everyone. It's not stupid. It's human. Maybe. Lucien moved to the window, looking out over the city. There's something I need to tell you. The king is dying. Lyra's breath caught. What? Illness. The physicians give him weeks, maybe months. He's keeping it quiet, but it's only a matter of time before everyone knows. Lucien's reflection in the glass looked older suddenly, burdened. Which means I'll be king soon, and everything changes. How? Enemies will come out of hiding. Rivals will make their moves. Everyone who's been waiting for the old king to die will suddenly have opportunities they didn't have before. He turned back to face her. I'm going to need people I can trust absolutely. People who are loyal to me, not just to the crown or to their own ambitions. You have those people, do I? Or do I have allies of convenience who'll abandon me the moment it's advantageous? Lucien walked closer. I need to know, Lyra. When I'm king, when the real battles start, will you stand with me? Not because you have to, but because you choose to. The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Lyra thought about where she'd been 6 months ago, dead, powerless, consumed by revenge and rage, and where she was now, influential, respected, building something that looked like an actual future. Lucien had made that possible. Not out of kindness, he'd needed her skills, her strategic mind, but he'd given her the opportunity anyway. That meant something. Yes, she said, when you're king, I'll stand with you, not as a servant or an asset, as an ally, a partner, if you'll have one. Lucien smiled, genuine, relieved. I'd like that. Partners. He extended his hand, Lyra took it, and in that moment she realized something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't about revenge anymore. Wasn't about Kaelan Vire or Darius Cove or settling old scores. This was about building something new, something that belonged to her and no one else. A future written in her own hand. The king died 3 weeks later, quietly in his sleep. The coronation was held within days, rushed,
because transition periods were dangerous times when ambitious nobles made their moves. Lyra stood in the great cathedral with hundreds of other courtiers, watching as Lucian knelt before the high priest and received the crown. Watching as he became King Lucian Drake, sovereign of the realm, the most powerful man in the kingdom. And when he stood and surveyed the assembled nobility, his eyes found hers across the crowd. A moment of acknowledgement, of shared understanding. They'd come a long way together, and they had further still to go. After the ceremony, during the celebration feast, Lady Margot approached Lyra again. "The new king seems to trust you," she observed. "That's unusual. Lucien doesn't trust easily. Maybe I've earned it. Or maybe you're just good at making people think you have." Margot's smile was knowing. "Either way, you've positioned yourself well. When Lucien starts appointing his inner council, I expect you'll have a seat at that table." "You think so?" "I know so. You're too valuable to leave in the shadows." Margot paused. "Just remember what I said before. The higher you climb, the harder the fall. And kings are even more dangerous than princes." "I'll keep that in mind." But Lyra wasn't afraid anymore. She'd survived death, survived betrayal, rebuilt herself from nothing into someone powerful enough to stand beside kings. Whatever came next, she could handle it. A month after the coronation, Lucien summoned her to the throne room, not the private study where they usually met. The actual throne room, with its soaring ceilings and stone pillars, and the massive throne itself, carved from black marble and inlaid with gold. Lucien sat on it, looking every inch a king, while Lyra approached across the vast empty floor. "You asked me to come, Your Majesty." "I did." Lucien gestured, and a servant appeared with a velvet cushion bearing an ornate scroll sealed with the royal crest. "I'm forming my inner council, advisors who will help me govern and make policy. People I trust to tell me the truth even when it's inconvenient." "That sounds important." "It is, which is why I want you on it." Lucien stood, descended the throne steps, and held out the scroll. "Lady Lyra Vale, I'm appointing you as royal advisor on strategic affairs. You'll have a seat at council meetings, access to classified information, authority to act in my name when necessary." Lyra took the scroll with hands that trembled slightly. "This is significant, yes, also dangerous. My enemies will become your enemies. Anyone who wants to hurt me will look at you as a target." Lucien's expression was serious. "But I need people like you, people who understand how power really works, people who can think strategically and act decisively when necessary." "I accept," Lyra said, "and I'll serve faithfully." "I know you will," Lucien smiled. "Welcome to the inner circle, Advisor Vale." The first council meeting was held the next day. Lyra sat at a massive table with 8 other advisors: Lord Vane for military matters, Lady Morse for northern affairs, Margot for domestic policy, and several others representing different aspects of governance. They looked at her with varying degrees of skepticism. She was the youngest person at the table by decades, a woman in a room of mostly men, a minor noble who'd risen impossibly fast. But when Lucien asked for her assessment of a border dispute with the Eastern Territories, she delivered it clearly and confidently, laying out 3 possible approaches with pros and cons for each. When Lord Vane challenged her analysis, she defended it with facts and logic. When Lady Morse suggested a compromise, Lyra refined it into something actually workable. By the end of the meeting, the skepticism had shifted to grudging respect. She belonged here. She'd earned her place. After the council dispersed, Margot caught up with her in the corridor. "That was well done," she said. "You held your own against people with decades more experience." "I just told the truth, offered what I saw." "Most people can't even do that. They're too busy protecting their own interests or playing political games." Margot studied her. "You're going to go far, Lyra, further than anyone expects. Just don't forget where you came from." "I won't," Lyra said. But the truth was more complicated. She didn't really know where she came from anymore. Kaelan Vire was dead. Lyra Vale had never really existed. This person she'd become was something new entirely. Someone forged from death and betrayal and impossible survival. Someone who'd learned to turn weakness into strength, invisibility into power. Someone who refused to be destroyed ever again. That evening, Lyra stood alone in her chambers,
larger now, more luxurious, befitting her new position, and looked at her reflection in the mirror. The face staring back was familiar now. She'd worn it long enough that it felt like hers instead of a borrowed disguise, but sometimes, in certain light, she could still see traces of who she used to be. The frontier wolf, the loyal warrior, the fool who'd believed trust was enough.
You would have hated this, she said to that ghost. Politics and schemes and careful words instead of honest violence. You would have called it cowardice. But Kaelan was wrong. This wasn't cowardice, it was evolution. She'd learned that power came in many forms, that sometimes the sharpest weapon was patience, that building something lasting required more than just strength. She'd learned to play the long game, and she was winning. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Ellen entered with a message. "My lady, the king requests your presence. He said it's urgent." Lyra found Lucian in the war room, surrounded by maps and reports, looking stressed in a way she rarely saw. "What's wrong?" "The Red Basin territory," he said without preamble. "It's collapsed into civil war. 3 different packs claiming authority, fighting over resources and territory. It's chaos." Lyra's chest tightened. Her old home. The place that had shaped her, destroyed her, and ultimately made her what she was. "And you want me to fix it?" "I want you to help me understand it. You know that world better than anyone else at court." Lucian gestured to the maps. "If we intervene, and we have to intervene because the instability threatens our borders, I need to know how. What approach will work? What will just make things worse?" Lyra studied the maps, seeing familiar territories marked with unfamiliar boundaries. Everything had changed since she left. Or since she died. Perspectives mattered. "You can't impose order from outside," she said slowly. "Frontier packs don't respond to external authority. They'll unite against you just to prove they can." "Then what do you suggest?" "Let them fight it out. Provide resources to whichever pack shows the most promise for stability. Support them quietly without making it obvious. Let them think they won on their own terms. That could take months, years. Better that than a war we can't win." Lyra looked up at him. "The frontier doesn't respect strength alone. It respects survival. Whichever pack can hold territory and maintain order deserves to lead. Anything else is just imposing our values on people who don't share them." Lucian considered this. That's actually wise. Frustrating, but wise. "I learned it the hard way." "I don't doubt it." Lucian moved closer. "I want you to go there, to the frontier, as my personal envoy. Assess the situation firsthand. Make contact with the competing packs. Figure out which one we should support." Lyra's breath caught. "You want me to go back?" "I know it's asking a lot. I know you have history there, even if I don't know all the details. But you're the only person I trust for this. Go back to the Red Basin. Walk the same ground where Kaelan Vire had died. Face people who might recognize her wolf, even if they didn't recognize her face." It was dangerous. Maybe impossible. But also necessary. She'd spent 6 months running from her past, building a new future while pretending the old one didn't matter. Maybe it was time to stop running, to face what she'd been instead of just who she was becoming. "I'll do it," she said. "But I need time to prepare, and I need to go alone. Alone is dangerous. Alone is the only way they'll talk to me. Show up with guards and soldiers, and they'll assume I'm there to conquer. Show up alone and vulnerable, and they'll listen. That's a hell of a risk. Everything worth doing is." Lyra smiled slightly. "Someone smart told me that once." 3 weeks later, Lyra stood at the border of Red Basin territory, looking out over land she'd thought she'd never see again. It looked the same. Harsh. Unforgiving. Beautiful in its brutality. She'd traveled light, just basic supplies and a single horse, left behind the silk gowns and jewelry and all the trappings of court life. Dressed instead in practical leather and sturdy boots, the kind of clothes a frontier wolf would wear. She looked like she belonged here, felt like she belonged here, in a way she never quite did at the palace. This was home. No matter what else had changed, that remained true. She crossed the border at dawn and headed toward what used to be the pack's main settlement. The village was smaller than she remembered, more desperate. Buildings that had been sturdy were now patched and crumbling. People moved with the wariness of those who expected violence at any moment.
War had not been kind to them.
She asked around carefully, gathering information. Which pack controlled which territory? Who was winning the power struggle? Where the current alpha candidates could be found? And one name kept coming up. Marcus Reed, a young warrior who'd risen from nothing to claim the largest faction. Brutal but fair, people said. Strong enough to hold territory, smart enough to make alliances. A leader worthy of the Red Basin, if he could survive long enough to solidify his power. Lyra found him in what used to be the pack hall, now repurposed as a military headquarters. He was younger than she expected, maybe 25, with the kind of scars that told stories and the kind of eyes that had seen too much. He looked up when she entered, hand moving automatically toward the knife at his belt. "Who are you?" "Someone who wants to talk about the future of this territory." "I don't know you." "No, but you know what I represent. The crown, resources, legitimacy." Lyra stepped closer, keeping her movements non-threatening. "I'm here to make you an offer." Marcus studied her with sharp, calculating eyes. "The crown doesn't make offers. It makes demands." "Not this time. This time, we're offering partnership, support in exchange for stability, trade agreements in exchange for peace." "Why? What does the crown care about frontier stability?" "Because chaos at the borders threatens everyone. Because trade routes through your territory are valuable. Because a stable Red Basin is worth more than a conquered one." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "What kind of support?" "Resources, food, weapons, medicine, intelligence about your rivals, recognition from the crown as the legitimate alpha of this territory. And in exchange, you maintain order, keep the trade routes open, stop raiding the border settlements, prove you can lead." "That's it?" "That's everything. Can you do it?" Marcus smiled slowly. "Yeah, I can do it." They negotiated for hours, working out details and terms. Lyra found herself impressed by Marcus's intelligence, his strategic thinking, his willingness to consider approaches beyond just violence. He reminded her of someone she used to be, maybe, or someone she could have become if things had gone differently. As the sun set and they finalized the agreement, Marcus looked at her curiously. "You're not like other court officials," he said. "You talk like someone who actually understands this place, like you've lived here." "Maybe I did, once, in another life." "That's cryptic." "It's the truth." Marcus didn't press, just extended his hand. "All right, Advisor Vale, we have a deal. The Red Basin Pack will honor it." Lyra shook his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. She'd come back to the place that had destroyed her, and instead of seeking revenge or running away, she'd built something new, something better. A partnership, an alliance, a future that didn't require blood and betrayal. It felt like closure, like coming full circle. That night, Lyra walked alone through the village, past places she remembered from her old life, the training grounds where she'd learned to fight, the hall where Darius had rejected her, the clearing where she'd died. It was empty now, just grass and rocks and moonlight. She stood there for a long time, letting the memories wash over her. Kaelan Vire had died here, betrayed and murdered and left to rot. But Lyra Vale had lived, had survived, had become something stronger than Kaelan ever could have been. "I won," she whispered to the ghost of who she used to be. "I survived. I built power. I proved you weren't weak. You were just incomplete." The wind carried her words away into the night, and for the first time since everything began, Lyra felt at peace. She returned to the capital 3 weeks later with a signed treaty and a detailed report for the king. Lucian read it carefully, asked probing questions, and then smiled. "You did it. You actually stabilized the frontier without bloodshed or occupation. That's remarkable." "Marcus Reed did most of it. I just gave him the resources to succeed." "Don't sell yourself short. You saw potential where others would have just seen another violent frontier pack. You built an alliance instead of an enemy." Lucien set down the report. "This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking I need. You've proven yourself, Lyra, not just as an advisor, but as someone capable of changing how we approach entire regions." "Thank you, Your Majesty. Stop calling me that when we're alone. It's Lucien. And we're partners, remember?" "Partners," Lyra agreed. Over the following months, her influence grew. She became known throughout the kingdom as the king's most trusted advisor,
the woman who'd stabilized the frontier, the strategist who found solutions no one else could see. Noble houses that had once dismissed her as a minor curiosity now courted her favor. Ambassadors from other kingdoms requested meetings. Even the common people knew her name, Lady Lyra Vale, the Omega who'd risen from nothing to stand beside kings. She'd become everything Kaelan Vire had fought to be and more. And she'd done it not through brute strength or loyalty to someone else's vision, but through her own intelligence, her own strategic mind, her own refusal to be destroyed. One evening, a year after the Frontier Treaty, Lyra stood in her private study. She had a whole suite of rooms now, befitting her position, and looked at a portrait that had recently been commissioned. It showed her in formal court dress, standing with quiet dignity, eyes looking directly at the viewer. Strong, confident, powerful. The artist had captured something essential about her. Not the pretty Omega face, not the delicate features, but the steel underneath, the survivor, the strategist, the person who'd been destroyed and rebuilt herself into something unbreakable. A knock at the door interrupted her contemplation. "Come in."
Lucien entered, looking tired but satisfied. "I wanted to give you this personally." He handed her a letter, sealed with the royal crest. Lyra opened it carefully and read the formal script. It was a grant of lands and title. She was being elevated to countess. Given estates in the northern provinces, wealth and authority independent of her position at court. She stared at the letter, hardly believing what she was reading. "You're making me a countess? You've earned it, multiple times over." Lucien smiled. "Besides, I need my advisors to have real authority. Being just Lady Lyra doesn't carry enough weight anymore. Countess Vale, on the other hand, that commands respect." "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep being exactly who you are. Keep challenging me when I'm wrong. Keep finding solutions no one else sees. Keep being the person I can trust absolutely." "I will," Lyra promised. "Always." After Lucy left, she stood alone with the letter, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. She'd started as Kaelan Vire, a frontier warrior who believed loyalty was everything. She'd died as that person, betrayed and destroyed. She'd been reborn as Lyra Vale, a frightened girl in a borrowed body. And she'd become Countess Lyra Vale, advisor to the king, architect of peace, someone powerful enough to reshape kingdoms. The journey had been brutal, had cost her everything she thought she was, but it had given her something better, something that actually belonged to her. Not borrowed strength, not reflected glory, just her own power, her own authority, her own future. She walked to the window and looked out over the city, glowing with lamplight in the gathering dusk. Somewhere out there, people were living their lives, raising families, building businesses, surviving and thriving in a kingdom that was more stable because of decisions she'd helped make. That mattered. More than revenge, more than proving herself, more than settling old scores, building something that lasted, that was the real victory. She thought about Darius sometimes, about how he'd believed loyalty was weakness, how he'd thought trust would destroy him. He'd been wrong. It wasn't loyalty that was dangerous. It was blind loyalty. Loyalty without wisdom or self-respect. Loyalty that made you a tool instead of a partner. Real loyalty, the kind built on mutual respect and shared purpose, that was strength. She'd learned that from Lucy. From her network of servants who'd become genuine allies, from Marcus Reed and the Frontier Treaty. From becoming someone worth trusting instead of just demanding trust from others. The moon rose, full and bright, casting silver light across the palace. Lyra watched it climb the sky, no longer seeing it as a symbol of betrayal and death. Now it was just the moon, beautiful and constant, a witness to everything that had happened and everything still to come. She smiled. The rejected mate had become an alpha, not through violence or inheritance or someone else's approval, but through her own choices, her own strength, her own refusal to stay destroyed. And that was worth more than any title, any position, any recognition. She'd proven to herself that she could survive anything, that she could build power from nothing, that she could become whoever she chose to be, regardless of where she started or what had tried to destroy her. That was the real victory. That was freedom. And it was only the beginning.